into the medium of his shadows, he has birthed a pantheon of white Shikigami, entities that serve as the polar opposites of their original forms. They are as follows. 1. Divine Dog's Reversal, the five-tailed kitsune. Grade, Special Grade. A majestic, sleek fox-like Shikigami possessing 5 flowing tails. Unlike its predatory, physical counterparts, this entity is a master of cerebral manipulation. It possesses the ability to cast illusions on a massive scale, capable of ensnaring the minds of seasoned sorcerers and special-grade curses alike. By manipulating the opponent's perception, it creates sensory hallucinations so vivid they become indistinguishable from reality. When Ethan first manifested this shadow, it possessed only a single tail. However, it has grown in power by consuming the energy of purged spirits. Each additional tail signifies an exponential leap in the potency and complexity of its mental attacks, which Ethan utilizes for psychological torture or total battlefield incapacitation. 2. New Reversal, the Earthworm Jorman. Grade, Special Grade. Inverting the aerial electrical nature of Nu, this reversal manifests as a colossal armored worm. It possesses the terrifying ability to swim through solid earth and bedrock as if it were water. Its primary technique is geokinesis, allowing Ethan to control sand and minerals on a catastrophic scale. This Shikigami provides Ethan with an absolute defense similar to a desert storm, automatic sand shields that intercept incoming projectiles. Offensively, it can crush minerals into fine dust to expand its arsenal, or lace the sand with heavy metals to create high-density crushing attacks capable of leveling city blocks. 3. Great Serpent Reversal, the Verdant Dragon Ryujin. Grade, Special Grade. The Great Serpent's reversal transforms the terrestrial snake into a majestic supersonic wood dragon. This entity wields Calamity-class wood manipulation, allowing Ethan to sprout entire forests or mountain-sized defensive structures in seconds. Beyond its structural utility, the wood acts as a life force parasite. Upon contact with a living being or a cursed spirit, the wood aggressively drains their cursed energy and vitality, converting the stolen essence into further growth for the Shikigami. 4. Max Elephant Reversal, the Phoenix Suzaku. Grade, Special Grade. By inverting the crushing weight and water of the elephant, Ethan manifests a phoenix of thermal energy. While its physical durability is remarkably low, its offensive output is arguably the highest in his arsenal, capable of generating heat reaching 5,000 degrees Celsius. To push this entity beyond its natural limits, Ethan entered into 2 binding vows. First vow, Ethan cannot summon the phoenix as a fully independent entity. In exchange, its thermal output is multiplied tenfold, reaching a staggering 50,000 degrees Celsius. Second vow, when using partial summoning, Ethan is restricted from attacking plural targets outside of his domain expansion. In exchange, the potency increases another threefold to 65,000 degrees Celsius and turning all matter within his 200-meter radius into volatile fuel for a massive-scale detonation. 5. Rabbit Escape Reversal, the Aegis Tortoise. Grade, Special Grade. Where the rabbits provide safety in numbers, their reversal provides safety in singularity. This lone building-sized tortoise is a kinetic sinkhole. It is capable of tanking ultimate techniques without taking a scratch. The shell functions as a battery, absorbing the energy of the attacks it receives. Once the energy threshold is reached, the tortoise can reflect the accumulated force back at the sender in a single devastating blast of concentrated power. 6. Piercing Ox Reversal, the Gravity Sheep Ares. Grade, Special Grade. Inverting the linear, physical charge of the ox, the sheep manifests as a creature that can control gravity. While physically fragile, it commands a fundamental force of the universe. It can exert localized high-gravity wells to crush opponents into the dirt or apply anti-gravity fields to Ethan and his allies, allowing for flight or the redirection of massive falling objects. 7. Toad Reversal, the Corrosive Widow. Grade, Grade 1. The toad's reversal results in a specialized spider Shikigami. It is a utility-focused assassin capable of weaving various metaphysical webs, from electrified strands that paralyze to acidic silks that dissolve flesh. Its ultimate trump card is the ability to liquefy its own form into a universal solvent. This highly corrosive acid can melt through any terrestrial metal. Only metals like vibranium, URU, or adamantium have a chance of resisting its touch. 8. Round Deer Reversal, the Swarm Moth Psyche. Grade 4 individually/special grade collective. The round deer's reversal is a tiny supersonic moth. Mirroring the rabbit escapes numbers, these moths can duplicate into the millions. While a single moth is harmless, the swarm acts as a massive debuff field. By attaching themselves to an opponent, they sap cursed energy and life force, disrupting neurological signals. In Ethan's hands, they are the perfect untraceable assassins for human targets, or a parasitic cloud that can render a special grade curse powerless. 9. Tiger Funeral Reversal (PA). Grade Special Grade. A hulking bipedal panda of immense physical stature. In a moment of light-hearted irony, Ethan christened this Shikigami PA. The core technique, Cursed Spirit Manipulation. By inverting the funeral aspect of the original tiger, which traditionally signifies the end of life, the reversal creates a vessel capable of subjugating the essence of the purged spirits. Upon the defeat or weakening of a cursed spirit, PA can manifest a vortex of refined cursed energy, condensing the entity into a small, dense black orb. Ethan can manifest these captured spirits at will, commanding them as a legion of secondary familiars. These spirits retain their original intelligence and curse techniques, allowing Ethan to deploy a diverse array of powers, ranging from elemental manipulation to complex domain-adjacent effects, without personally expending his own energy reserves. Advanced Application, Maximum Output, Uzumaki. The pinnacle of PA's capability lies in the maximum, Uzumaki. By sacrificing a vast number of captured spirits, PA can condense their collective cursed energy into a singular attack. Asterisk Technique Extraction. If PA utilizes a special grade curse as the core of an Uzumaki, he doesn't just gain a one-time blast of energy, he effectively strips the technique from the spirit, allowing Ethan or PA to utilize that specific curse technique as if it were their own for a limited duration. For Ethan, PA is his greatest long-term investment. The more Ethan hunts, the more tools PA adds to the arsenal. 10. Maharaga Reversal, Abaddon. Grade Unclassified. The reversal Maharaga manifests as a terrifying, biblical-style demon, a towering figure with multiple wings. In its right hand it holds a blade that shares the properties of the inverted spear of heaven, capable of forcibly nullifying any technique or magic it touches. This Shikigami can only be summoned against an opponent it deems worthy. Because of this picky nature, Ethan has not seen it in action, leaving its full potential as a mystery in his arsenal. All his RCT summons and their chimeras can be manifested into curse tools too. Though Ethan finds it ironic how the angelic being like Maharaga has Sword of Extermination, and demonic being like Abaddon has inverted Spear of Heaven. Back near the center of the dusty intersection of Puente Antiguo, Agent Phil Coulson adjusted his suit jacket and approached the God of Thunder and Jane Foster. "Excuse me," he announced, his voice carrying that signature blend of professional courtesy and his signature calm. He turned his gaze toward the tall, armored blonde man. "Donald? I don't think you've been completely honest with me," he added, a small, knowing smirk playing on his lips as he continued to use the alias Dr. Selvig had hastily concocted only a day prior. Thor turned, his cape billowing in the desert breeze. "Know this, son of Cowl," Thor began, his voice resonant and commanding. "You and I, we fight for the same cause, the protection of this world. From this day forward, consider us allies." He paused, glancing at Jane, whose eyes were still wide with a mix of scientific wonder and personal affection. "However, the terms of our cooperation are simple. I shall provide you with the wisdom of Asgardian science, knowledge that will dwarf your current understanding, but only if you return every piece of Miss Foster's research. Every notebook, every hard drive, and every sensor." Coulson didn't hesitate. He recognized a strategic win when he saw one. He didn't just agree to return the equipment. He pledged that S.H.I.E.L.D. would fully sponsor Jane's ongoing research into the Bifrost, Einstein-Rosen bridges, and localized wormholes. In exchange, Thor committed to a comprehensive debriefing, an exchange of Asgardian lore that would bridge the gap between magic and Midgardian physics. The group, the Warriors Three, Lady Sif, Thor, and Jane, traveled to the outskirts of town, arriving at the exact spot where the scorched earth marked Thor's initial arrival. Jane stood at the edge of the circle, her heart racing as she looked at the man who had quite literally fallen from the stars. The atmosphere grew heavy as the clouds began to swirl in a familiar rhythm overhead. Thor turned to Jane, taking her hand with a gentleness. He spoke of the Rainbow Bridge and the wonders of his home, promising her that this was not a final goodbye. "I will return for you, Jane Foster," he vowed. "Once this ordeal with my brother is over, I shall visit Midgard again, not as an exile but as a friend." With a final nod to his companions, the Bifrost erupted from the sky in a pillar of prismatic light. When the dust settled and the roaring sound faded into the silence, the Asgardians were gone. Jane stood alone examining the charred sigil left behind by the Bifrost. Chapter 36, Unanswered. 1 year later, May 3, 2012. Maria Hill's mind flashed back to that fateful exchange between her, Director Fury and Coulson after the S.H.I.E.L.D. facility caved in from the Tesseract's energy surge. Director Fury, do you copy?" Phil's voice had crackled through the comms. "The Tesseract is with a hostile force. I have men down." "Hill," Fury replied. She remembered the knot forming in her stomach. "A lot of men are still trapped. I don't know how many survived," Hill had reported. "Sound a general call. I want every living soul not in search and rescue looking for that briefcase," Fury ordered, referring to Loki. "Roger that." Hill was, if nothing else, a good soldier. But it was what Fury said next that really shook her. "Coulson, head back to base. This is a level 7. As of right now, we are at war." War. That term hadn't been used in such a dire context since the 1940s. And so they prepared for it. They summoned the mightiest men and women S.H.I.E.L.D. could assemble: Captain America, Iron Man, Black Widow, and even Dr. Banner, though the Doctor was recruited primarily for his expertise in gamma radiation to track the cube. They eventually found their target. Not the cube, but the man behind the threat. Loki was intercepted in Germany and taken into custody. Aside from Thor crashing their transport mid-flight and ultimately joining their side to stop Loki's designs for Earth, the transition to the helicarrier had been relatively stable. Now, as she monitored the bridge, she listened to the tense conversation between Rogers, Romanoff, Dr. Banner, and Thor. "He really grows on you, doesn't he?" Dr. Banner remarked sarcastically. "Loki is going to drag this out," the captain said, turning toward the god of thunder. "Thor, what's his play?" "He has an army called the Chitauri. They are not of Asgard nor any world known. He means to lead them against your people. They will win him the Earth in return, I suspect, for the Tesseract," Thor concluded grimly. "An army? From outer space?" Captain Rogers repeated, as if tasting the words. The situation had just escalated to a global-level threat. If Loki truly had an armada at his back. Hill didn't even want to finish that thought. "So he needs a portal. That's why he took Eric Selvig," Dr. Banner deduced. "Selvig?" Thor inquired. "He's an astrophysicist," Banner replied. "He is a friend," Thor added softly. "Loki has them under some kind of spell, including one of our own," Natasha spoke up, her mind clearly on Clint Barton. "I want to know why Loki let us take him," Steve interrupted. "He isn't leading an army from in here. I don't think we should be focusing on Loki. That guy's brain is a bag of cats, you can smell the crazy on him," Banner said, fidgeting with his glasses. "Have care how you speak," Thor warned. "Loki is beyond reason, but he is of Asgard and he is my brother." "He killed 80 people in 2 days," Natasha countered flatly. Thor paused, the weight of the facts hitting him. "He's adopted." "I'm thinking about the mechanics. The iridium, what do they need the iridium for?" Banner questioned. Just then, Tony Stark and Phil Coulson walked into the lab. "It's a stabilizing agent. It means the portal won't collapse on itself like it did at the S.H.I.E.L.D. base," Stark announced the moment he entered. He moved toward Thor, patting the god's arm. "No hard feelings, Point Break. You've got a mean swing. Also, it means the portal can stay open as wide and as long as Loki wants." Stark marched directly toward the control consoles as if he were the captain of some medieval flagship, taking command. "Raise the mizzenmast, ship the topsails. That man is playing Galaga, thought we wouldn't notice, but we did." Tony Stark didn't break stride as he walked. He placed a hand over his left eye and turned to Hill. "How does Fury even see these?" he asked, gesturing to the obscured left side monitors. "He turns," she replied flatly. "Sounds exhausting," Stark muttered. "The rest of the raw materials Agent Barton can get his hands on pretty easily. The only major component he still needs is a power source of high energy density, something to kickstart the cube." When did you become an expert on thermonuclear astrophysics? Hill asked sarcastically. Last night, Stark countered. Selvig's notes, the extraction theory papers, am I the only one who did the reading? Does Loki need any particular kind of power source? Rogers inquired, trying to ground the conversation. He'd have to heat the cube to 120 million Kelvin just to break through the Coulomb barrier, Banner replied, still fidgeting with those same glasses. Unless Selvig has figured out how to stabilize the quantum tunneling effect, Stark added. Well, if he can do that, then he could achieve heavy ion fusion on any reactor on the planet, Banner concluded. Stark pointed at Banner with a grin. Finally, someone who speaks English. Is that what just happened? Rogers asked, looking as lost in the dark as everyone else in the room. It's good to meet you, Dr. Banner, Tony added. Your work on anti-electron collision is unparalleled. And I'm a huge fan of how you lose control and turn into an enormous green rage monster. Thanks, Banner replied, visibly uncomfortable with the mention of the Hulk. Dr. Banner is only here to track the cube, Director Fury interjected while walking in, addressing Stark. I was hoping you might join him. Let's start with that stick of his, Rogers gave his 2 cents. It may be magical, but it works awfully like a Hydra weapon. I don't know about that, but it is powered by the cube, Fury said. And I'd like to know how Loki used it to turn 2 of the sharpest men I know into his personal flying monkeys. Monkeys? I do not understand, Thor questioned. Apparently, Asgard lacked primates. I do. I understood that reference, Captain Rogers replied immediately. Thor looked around the room, his eyes finally landing on Coulson. He spoke directly to him. Where is your lightning warrior? Ethan Park. Phil looked like he had been waiting for that exact question. I think you might be able to help us in that regard, he said, placing a wooden box on the table. Inside lay a kunai badly damaged. When Ethan had been blasted away by the destroyer, the blade, though not in the direct line of fire, had been scorched and cracked by the proximity of the Odin force blast. Ethan gave you one too, right? Ours was damaged, and I didn't have a chance to request a new one before he flew away, Phil added. Flew? Rogers questioned. What is happening here? Tony also seemed lost. Though he had encountered Ethan, he hadn't seen the boy's face. You know Ethan? Banner asked Thor. Yes. He helped defeat the destroyer. How do you know him? Thor asked. He is a friend, Banner added. Hill knew Ethan and the Hulk had a connection dating back to the Harlem incident, but now she had confirmation. Seeing the commotion, Fury interjected. As far as we know, Ethan Park is a super-powered human with a strange array of abilities, from flight and superstrength to the ability to heal the fatally wounded. As he spoke, a blurry image of Ethan walking out of a crumbled Mexican home appeared on the screen. Tony stared at the footage, fixated on the wheel hovering above the figure. Hey. I know that guy. He was there during the whole Obadiah Stane situation. I asked you people if you knew him and you said you didn't. Stark said while pointing at Coulson, and I'm not even going to ask about the flight or the superstrength, but what do you mean, heal fatal wounds? He turned to Fury, then looked at Phil as if he'd been betrayed by a lifelong friend. Ignoring Stark, Fury turned back to Thor. We could really use him right now. So can you help us with that? Thor looked taken aback. That kunai was kept safely in his chambers back home. With his strength and hammer returned, he hadn't thought to carry it everywhere. He looked around the room and admitted in a low voice, I forgot it back home. But, does your weapon not glow anymore? Thor asked, his hand hovering over the damaged metal. His own kunai always hummed with a faint light whenever he touched it. It does, but the glow has diminished significantly since the destroyer's attack, Phil added, his brow furrowing as he looked at the dull blade. Have you tried it then? Throwing it on the ground, I mean. Thor inquired, his eyes moving between the agents. I am completely lost here, Stark interjected, throwing his hands up in a gesture of typical impatience. Me too, Captain Rogers added, shifting his weight as he looked at the small, unassuming weapon. Phil looked toward Director Fury, seeking silent permission. They had not tried it yet. Until they learned about an army from outer space, the situation had seemed manageable. They had preferred to keep Ethan as a last resort, a hidden card in their hand. But the stakes had changed. They were no longer dealing with a rogue prince, but an invasion. Do it, Director Fury commanded. He gestured for the staff to clear a space in the center of the briefing room. All the agents at the surrounding workstations paused what they were doing, their eyes fixed on the center of the floor as Phil stepped forward. The room went silent as Phil gripped the hilt, took a steady breath, and threw the kunai hard against the metal floor. Then silence. 1 second. Then 2 seconds. 5 seconds passed. And then slowly a full minute ticked by. Nothing happened. The blade just lay there, cold and inanimate on the helicarrier floor. She, the director, and Phil exchanged grim glances. They would have to find another way to contact Ethan Park before the sky opened up. Chapter 37, A Higher Form of War. The next day, May 4, 2012. Inside the helicarrier's specialized laboratory, Bruce Banner and Tony Stark were deep in conversation when director Nick Fury marched in, his expression unreadable but his intent clear. "What exactly are you doing, Mr. Stark?" Fury asked. He had just been alerted to a foreign virus infiltrating the Secure S.H.I.E.L.D. mainframe, and he didn't need a debriefing to know the source. "I was just wondering the same thing about you," Tony replied, not even bothered to look up from his translucent screens. "You are supposed to be focused on locating the Tesseract," Fury stated firmly, closing the distance between them. "We are. The tracking algorithm is locked, and we are currently sweeping the globe for the signature. When we get a hit, we will have the location narrowed down to within half a mile," Banner interjected, gesturing toward the primary computer frame. "And you will get your precious cube back, no muss no fuss," Tony added. Just then, a decrypted window bypassed the S.H.I.E.L.D. firewall, flashing a heading, Phase 2. Tony squinted. "What is Phase 2? Fury didn't have a chance to offer a cover story. Captain Rogers suddenly walked into the lab, his face a mask of disappointment, and slammed a heavy Phase 2 prototype weapon onto the table. "Phase 2 is S.H.I.E.L.D. using the cube to manufacture weapons," Steve said. "Sorry, the computer was moving a little too slow for me." Fury tried to counter. "Rogers, we gathered everything related to the Tesseract, but that does not mean," he was cut off. Tony turned his monitor around to face the director. "I'm sorry, Nick, what were you saying about lying?" At that moment, Thor and Natasha Romanoff entered the room. The atmosphere turned suffocating. Steve continued, "I was wrong, director. The world hasn't changed one bit." Banner turned his attention to Natasha. "Did you know about this?" Natasha ignored the question, her eyes fixed on the doctor. "Do you want to consider removing yourself from this environment, doctor?" She was clearly trying to de-escalate before the Hulk took notice. "Oh, I was doing just fine being removed. I was in Kolkata," Banner countered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Loki is manipulating you," Natasha argued. She had just left the interrogation, she knew Loki's true play was to trigger the Hulk. "And you aren't?" Banner questioned, leaning over the console. "You didn't come here because I batted my eyelashes at you," she affirmed, her hand moving subtly toward her belt. "Yeah, and I'm not leaving just because you've suddenly grown twitchy. I would like to know why S.H.I.E.L.D. is using the Tesseract to build weapons of mass destruction." Banner pointed aggressively at the digital blueprints on the screen. "Because of him," Fury declared, pointing a finger directly at Thor. "Me?" Thor asked, genuinely bewildered by the accusation. "Last year, Earth had a visitor from another planet whose personal grudge leveled a small town," Fury said, stepping toward Thor to back up his words. "We learned that not only are we not alone, but we are also hopelessly, hilariously outgunned." "My people want nothing but peace with your planet," Thor affirmed, his voice booming with sincerity. "But you're not the only ones out there, are you?" Fury questioned sharply. "And you're not the only threat. The world is filling up with people like Park, beings who can't be matched and more importantly can't be controlled." "Like you control the cube?" Captain Rogers added, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your work with the Tesseract is what drew Loki and his allies to this world," Thor concluded grimly. "It is a signal to the realms that Earth is ready for a higher form of war." "A higher form?" the captain questioned. "You forced our hand," Fury countered. "We had to come up with some way to—" "A nuclear deterrent," Stark interrupted. "Because that always calms everything right down." Fury turned on him. "Remind me again, Stark, how exactly did you make your fortune?" "I'm sure if he still made weapons, Stark would be neck-deep in this," Captain Rogers argued, looking at Tony with disdain. "Wait a second, how did this become about me?" Tony questioned, offended. "I'm sorry, isn't everything?" the captain shot back. I thought humans were more evolved than this, Thor muttered, clearly having had enough of the petty bickering. Excuse me? Do we come to your planet and blow stuff up? Fury countered, rounding on the Asgardian. The room devolved into a chaotic mess of voices as they all started bickering at once. Nearby, the Mind Stone inside the scepter began to glow with an ominous, sickly blue light, feeding on their aggression or perhaps fueling it. Finally, Banner spoke, his voice cutting through the noise. I mean, this is his MO, isn't it? What are we, a team? No, no, no. We're a chemical mixture that breeds chaos. We're a time bomb. Seeing Banner's growing agitation, Fury took a cautious step forward. You need to step away, Doctor. Tony tried to defend him. Why shouldn't a guy let off a little steam? He placed a mocking hand on the captain's shoulder. Rogers swatted the hand away instantly. You know damn well why. Stay in line. Tony looked Rogers dead in the eye. Oh, I'm starting to want you to make me. The captain walked a slow circle around Tony. Yeah, big man in a suit of armor. Take that off and what are you? Tony didn't miss a beat. Genius. Billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. I know guys with none of that worth 10 of you, Rogers asserted. I've seen the footage. The only thing you really fight for is yourself. You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play, to lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you. I think I just cut the wire, Tony answered simply. Always a way out, huh? You might not be a threat, but you better stop pretending to be a hero, Captain added. A hero? Like you? Tony countered. You're a laboratory experiment, Rogers. Everything special about you came out of a bottle. Put on the suit, Captain challenged. Let's go a few rounds. Ha ha ha, you people are so petty and tiny, Thor interjected, speaking the last part as a detached observation rather than a direct insult. Fury tried to usher Banner out of the volatile situation, but Banner finally lashed out. The cell was in case you needed to kill me. But you can't. I know because I tried. I asked Park to kill me. When he refused, I got alone and put a bullet in my mouth, and the other guy just spat it out. So I moved on. I focused on helping people until you dragged me back here and put everyone in danger. You want to know my secret, Agent Romanoff? You want to know how I stay calm? Fury and Romanoff instinctively reached for their sidearms. Dr. Banner, put down the scepter, the captain intervened, noticing Bruce had grabbed the weapon without realizing it. Just then, the alarm for the tracking algorithm shrieked. Banner left the weapon and walked over to the monitor. He turned to check the monitor and saw the Tesseract's location was manifesting right on the helicarrier. He didn't have time to warn anyone before the explosion ripped through the hull. Boom! Today marks the 4th year since Ethan mastered the 10 Shadows technique. Within the last year, Ethan had finally finished his high school studies. He had navigated the curriculum once before in his previous life, where he had been nearly finished with college. Throughout these last 4 years, he had exclusively accepted only special grade subjugation requests issued by Camartage. Ethan remembered Battle of New York. He has been preparing for it. Though he didn't remember the exact date when, he was sure it was during early May. Far away in the Red Sea, Scholan Island. Ethan had originally visited this island earlier this year, back in January when it seemed to form out of nowhere. Scholan Island emerged in the southern Red Sea in late 2011/early 2012 as the direct result of a submarine volcanic eruption within the Zubair Archipelago, a territory owned by Yemen. Ethan had suspected the involvement of a certain volcano-headed cursed spirit, and upon his arrival his suspicions were proven right. The cursed energy signature was unmistakable, a special grade. And the island itself was odd. However, at the time he had found no active curses remaining on the island. So he had 100 of his Shikigami, the Reiju, stationed across the island, as they were capable of sharing their sight with him. He kept them there in case something unusual happened, and finally it had. On the morning of May 4, 2012, all of his Reiju Shikigami were suddenly dead in an instant. Each Reiju was individually a Grade 2 threat, but to be capable of slaughtering hundreds of them simultaneously. Ethan realized it for what it was, an invitation and a trap. It was timed perfectly with the onset of Loki's invasion. Coincidence? Unlikely. Tora manifested his hands from the depths of his shadow and opened a sling ring portal within the island. Stepping through, he immediately sensed the familiar, searing cursed energy of the disaster-grade spirit Jogo. That was a hell of an invitation, Ethan announced to the seemingly empty air. Come out. You aren't going to hide now, are you? Hiya. Jogo descended from above, cratering the earth meters away from where Ethan stood. Upon impact, every rock within a 30-meter radius turned to liquid from the sheer, oppressive heat radiating from the volcano-headed spirit. Following their encounter 4 years ago, Jogo had realized he was far too weak. But unlike Mahito, he lacked the patience for a decades-long scheme. Knowing he couldn't defeat Ethan as he was, he had entered into a binding vow. In exchange for restricting himself to a 10% cursed energy output for the remainder of the day, Jogo could boost his output to a staggering 1000% for a window of exactly 24 minutes. The base Jogo, already comparable to a 13-finger Sukuna, could manifest temperatures of 5000 degrees Celsius at 100% output. Under the effects of the vow, his flames now reached a terrifying 50,000 degrees Celsius. But that wasn't all. Even with this astronomical output, Jogo's body would normally suffer cursed energy burnout within 10 minutes of this state. To bypass this, he had spent the last 4 years storing his energy into a suitable vessel specifically to use against Ethan Park. Scholan Island was that vessel. Within the boundaries of this island, the disaster-cursed Jogo would never run out of cursed energy. And the moment Ethan Park stepped through the portal, those 24 minutes began to tick away. What? You been juicing or something? Ethan asked, feeling the air around him begin to combust. To his left, right, and rear, volcanic vents erupted from the trees. Pillars of flame reaching up to 50,000 degrees Celsius converged on him instantly. His offensive power has taken a massive leap, but his total pool of cursed energy remains the same, Ethan analyzed. A time-based pact, perhaps? Haha, marvelous. Using the cover of the blinding heat as a screen, Jogo closed the distance in a blur of speed. As the vent attack subsided, he caught sight of Ethan's shadowy silhouette through the haze. Jogo lunged, his hand covered in cursed energy. Upon impact, his cursed energy flashed black and space distorted. Black flash. Chapter 38, The Prince's Gambit. Ethan was blasted across the island by the force of the impact, hurtling through the air until he slammed into the opposite shoreline. Through Mahito, Jogo had learned everything about the sorcerer known as Atlas Orion. He knew Ethan's arsenal consisted of 9 shadows: the divine dogs, the rabbits, the lightning-infused bird, the great serpent, the water-bearing mammoth, the toad, the piercing ox, the deer capable of reverse curse technique, the funeral tiger and their chimeras. Jogo also knew that for the next 24 minutes, his heat was so intense he could simultaneously combust all of those shadows the moment they manifested, even from a distance. Ethan Park should have had no counter for these flames. A moment later, Jogo appeared high in the sky above Ethan's landing zone, his hands glowing as he charged a devastating follow-up. I will incinerate you, brat. Ultimate technique. As he chanted, dozens of gargantuan meteors manifested in the sky, consuming the island's mountainous rock to fuel their mass. Maximum meteor. The projectiles thundered down, obliterating the ground where Ethan stood. Boom! 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 The environment reddened and the sheer spike in atmospheric temperature caused the island's crustal layer to turn to liquid. Moments later, Jogo descended, landing on the smoldering surface of one of his meteors. He scanned the devastation with his single eye. His cursed energy signature has vanished, Jogo thought, but that could be a trick, just like last time. Suddenly, Ethan landed softly on an adjacent meteor, the wings of Nu dissolving back into his shadow. The last attack was strong, but it wouldn't matter if it didn't hit. Even with a 10-fold increase in defensive reinforcement, Nu's wings were taking passive damage just existing in this environment, Ethan realized. I can't summon any of my regular Shikigami. None of them, not even the round deer, could survive these temperatures. Even the Aegis tortoise would be killed by a direct hit. My only options now are Maharaga, and probably Abaddon. What have you done to yourself? Ethan asked, his voice steady as he squinted at the volcano-headed spirit through the roiling smoke. Nobody has pushed him this far before. At that moment, Tora reached out through their mental link. Ethan, his cursed energy level. Yeah, I noticed, Ethan replied. It hasn't depleted a bit, even after those high-output attacks. And his output, it's beyond ridiculous. I suspect he is drawing from the island itself, some kind of reserve bank, Tora suggested. I knew something was odd with this island the moment I stepped here. Gauntlets. Tora, Ethan commanded through their mental link. Making excuses, are we? Jogo mocked. He felt he could unleash 100 more such attacks without a hint of exhaustion. I will kill you today, Ethan Park. It doesn't have to be me smiling in the end, so long as curses emerge as the true hum. Monologuing? In the middle of a fight. Ethan's voice didn't come from the meteor where Jogo was looking, it came from directly behind him. Instantaneous movement? How? Jogo's mind raced as he felt the air shift. Ethan had activated Eclipse. His hands were already encased in gauntlets forged from destroyer metal, a product of metallurgy spells within the mystic arts, and infused with Torah's essence. You will make a great addition to Poe's arsenal, so I'm not gonna kill you, Ethan thought. Ethan landed a hit, then another and another. He maintained a relentless barrage for 30 seconds, a blur of motion that culminated in a final strike that sent Jogo hurtling back to the center of their initial battlefield. Every single blow resulted in a space-distorting black flash, amplified by the density of Torah's gauntlets. Jogo was wheezing, coughing up thick, purple blood. Consecutive black flashes? And why did it feel like the brat hadn't taken a single scratch from the previous 50,000 degrees Celsius explosion? Jogo knew that if he had taken that barrage at his standard 100% output, he would have been exorcised instantly. He looked up, bracing his dislocated jaw with one hand. Ethan Park stood there calmly, staring out at the horizon that had turned a bruised red from the sheer violence of their clash. Ethan gave him a side glance. You hold ideals to kill me, they're fascinating. Is this all your conviction amounts to? He asked mockingly, gesturing to the scorched ruins of the island. Volcanic steam hissed violently from Jogo's ears and head. Don't underestimate me, brat. There won't even be ashes left of you when I am done. Just then Jogo felt it, a presence manifesting from within his own shadow. A massive, terrifying Shikigami emerged, a heavy stone wheel hovering atop its head. A chimera? It doesn't matter. Jogo thought frantically. He leaped backward, launching a swarm of ember insects at the new threat. But Maharaga didn't flinch. The divine general outran the exploding insects, closing the distance instantly to invade Jogo's personal space. He brought his right arm down in a crushing arc, wielding the sword of extermination, a blade that pulsates with concentrated reverse curse technique, RCT. What? Jogo barely had time to process the danger before his right arm was severed clean. Maharaga didn't stop, pivoting to kick the disaster spirit back toward Ethan. Ethan was already waiting. As Jogo entered his reach, he delivered another devastating black flash. Jogo was launched horizontally into the ridges, his physical form carving jagged craters into the rapidly cooling rock. That sword is a cursed tool that outputs pure RCT, that is no chimera, a 10th Shikigami? Jogo realized with mounting dread. He struggled to regenerate the severed limb, but the positive energy left behind by the blade acted like an acid, stalling his healing factor. It could kill me instantly if it hits my core mass. This isn't good at all. He thought. Even with his nigh limitless reserves and 1000% output, a direct infusion of reverse curse technique would mean a total erasure. Just then a single arrow whistled through the steam, appearing directly in front of him. Another cursed tool? I don't sense any RCT from it. Useless, Jogo thought, reflexively swinging his left hand to swat the projectile aside. To his shock, his left arm was obliterated upon impact. The momentum arrow, carrying the essence of piercing ox, defied its small size. Immediately, he felt an immense buildup of cursed energy radiating from the arrow's origin. Jogo forced his left arm to regrow, though his right remained a cauterized stump from Maharaga's assault, and braced himself to dodge a follow-up. But the blast never came. Instead, two swords, one with a black hilt and one with white, shot out from his own shadow, pinning his robes and flesh to the rock and immobilizing him. A year ago, these blades imbued with the divine dogs would have melted just by being in his presence. Now, forged from destroyer metal, they withstood the 50,000 degrees Celsius heat without softening. While Jogo was pinned, a billion-volt lightning strike descended from the heavens. Though the current wasn't compressed, like when Ethan used it against Maharaga, it was still a billion volts lighting strike using Nu's spear, effectively scorching the disaster curse despite his bottomless reserves. Ethan blurred into existence directly in front of him. In his hand was a 3-section staff imbued with max elephant, its edges serrated and gleaming. He drove one end through Jogo's single eye and delivered a brutal kick to the back of the weapon, forcing the serrated destroyer metal to tunnel completely through the spirit's skull until it emerged from the back. Before Jogo could even scream, Ethan retrieved an RCT disc imbued with the round deer from his shadow. He slammed it onto the ruin of Jogo's eye socket and activated it, flooding the spirit's head with lethal positive energy. To top it all off, Ethan landed a haymaker black flash hook that launched the volcano curse into the stratosphere. Maharaga appeared midair, meeting the rising spirit with a reinforced cursed energy kick that sent Jogo screaming back down toward the heart of the island in an instant, creating a crater from impact. Ethan landed gracefully at the edge of the crater, looking down at Jogo's battered form. The disaster curse was a mess of scorched earth and purple ichor, still struggling to regenerate despite the absolute thrashing it had just endured. Ethan channeled reverse curse technique through Funeral Tiger and summoned forth its reversal. Puh! Per emerged from the darkness, glancing first at the crater and then back at Ethan. The Shikigami required no further instructions. He immediately leaped down beside the weakened Jogo and began condensing the spirit's essence into a dense, swirling sphere using his core technique, curse spirit manipulation. The disaster curse, Jogo, was forcibly compressed into a glowing golden-red orb, which Pa consumed without hesitation. With a silent, respectful nod to his master, the Shikigami sank back into the depths of the shadow. Throughout the entire duration of the engagement, the wheel hovering above Maharaga had not spun a single time. It was unnecessary. The Divine General had already adapted to the heat long ago, having been exposed to temperatures reaching 65,000 degrees Celsius during training sessions within Ethan's own arsenal. Ethan had intentionally withheld his one-shot attacks, specifically commanding Maharaga to refrain from delivering a killing blow with the Sword of Extermination. He needed Jogo neutralized but intact, ensuring Pa could successfully observe and absorb the spirit's power. Then, as if remembering something, Ethan reached into a specialized mirror dimension seal, a localized pocket of folded space, and retrieved his Stark-designed smartphone. He flicked the screen to life, his destroyer metal gauntlets dissolving back into his shadow. His notifications were a chaotic flood of alerts from his network of reconnaissance agents stationed throughout New York in preparation for the invasion. Though the messages were frantic and fragmented, the core was undeniable. A massive wormhole had stabilized in the sky directly above Midtown Manhattan, and an armada of extraterrestrial invaders was currently laying waste to the city. He scrolled through the timestamps. The initial reports dated back 15 minutes. He had been engaged with Jogo on this desolate rock for nearly 20. The realization hit him with clarity. It seemed the Prince of Lies had successfully brokered a deal with the cursed spirits of Earth. But what could Loki have possibly offered a disaster-grade curse in exchange for what was essentially a suicide mission? Jogo was many things, but he was no fool. Ethan realized he didn't have the luxury of time to drag the truth out of the absorbed cursed spirit right now. Those questions would have to wait until after he had dealt with Loki. With a sharp mental command, Tora manifested and sparked a shimmering sling ring portal, the gateway opening onto the chaos of New York. If it was truly Loki, then this was a masterstroke of manipulation, luring one of Earth's primary defenders to a remote volcanic island for the sole purpose of clearing the board for his invasion. Loki had clearly employed a similar tactic with the Avengers aboard the helicarrier, attempting to dismantle the team from within by striking them where they felt most secure, their own home ground, the helicarrier. Chapter 39, The Battle of New York, Part 1. Hawkeye and Black Widow are seen fighting a Chitauri squadron on the frantic streets of Manhattan. Natasha is wielding a salvaged Chitauri spear to blast them away, while Clint is forced to use his arrows manually in close-quarters combat. Just then, Captain Rogers jumps in from the opposite side, making quick work of the nearest soldiers. Suddenly, a deafening crack of thunder echoes through the air, and an approaching squad is instantly incinerated by a bolt of lightning as the God of Thunder makes his entry, still visibly wounded from Loki's treacherous sneak attack. "What's the story upstairs?" Captain Rogers asked Thor, looking toward the portal. "The power surrounding the cube is impenetrable," Thor concluded grimly. "Thor's right, you've got to deal with these guys first." Tony's voice crackled through the intercom, referring to the Chitauri soldiers swarming the ground. "How do we do this?" Natasha asked, looking to Rogers for a plan. "As a team," Rogers replied firmly. "I have unfinished business with Loki," Thor announced, gripping Mjolnir tightly. Yeah, get in line, Clint muttered while knocking another arrow and squaring his aim. Save it. Loki is going to keep this fight focused on us, and that's exactly what we need. Without him, these things could run wild, Captain America said as he walked past them, eyes scanning the horizon. Just then, the low rumble of a motorcycle engine could be heard approaching from the distance. Dr. Banner has arrived. So this all seems horrible, he said, stepping off his worn-out Triumph motorcycle. I've seen worse, Natasha replied, offering a pointed reference to their previous encounter in the helicarrier. Sorry, Banner muttered, squinting against the sunlight. No, we could use a little worse right now, Natasha reassured him. Just then, Thor turned around and looked toward an adjacent building with a grin. He is also here, he declared. Ethan flickered in front of the group using raw speed, the wheel of harmony still hovering above his head. Thor, Ethan said with a smirk. We really have to stop meeting like this, he added, referring to their habit of crossing paths in the heart of a war zone. He looked across the group at Dr. Banner. The man looked disheveled in his oversized clothes. Clearly, turning into the Hulk was a costly affair for one's wardrobe. The two shared a silent, knowing nod. Captain America looked hesitant, his gaze lingering on Ethan for a moment. Proper introductions will have to wait, but I was told you can heal fatally wounded civilians. Is that true? Ethan turned fully toward the man in the star-spangled uniform, his expression grave. Yes, Captain Rogers. I trust Phil informed you that I can serve as a healer. Have your team send any wounded to the New York Public Library, the Stephen A. Schwartzman Building at 5th and 42nd. Got it, Rogers nodded, mentally cataloging the tactical advantage of a dedicated triage center, though his face betrayed a flicker of visible sadness at the mention of the fallen agent. That location was only 2 blocks west of the main Chitauri flight path. Ethan had already deployed thousands of rapid escape Shikigami, each carrying 2 RCT discs capable of deploying a 10-meter healing radius. Captain Rogers turned on his comms. Stark, we've got them, he said, answering Tony's earlier inquiry. Banner and Park both? Stark asked through the intercom, his tone shifting with relief. Just like you said, the captain replied firmly. Well, then tell them to suit up, because I'm bringing the party to you, Tony announced as he banked around a skyscraper, a massive Chitauri Leviathan hot on his tail. Ethan recognized this scene instantly, though he felt no excitement. In the brief time he had been on the ground, his senses had already catalogued over 100 deaths in his immediate vicinity alone. In the movies, civilian casualties were largely off-screen, mere statistics mentioned in the aftermath, but here the air was thick with the scent of blood and ash. Ethan looked toward Stark Tower. He realized he needed a way to offset the portal's energy, and for that he needed Loki's scepter. I don't see how that's a party, Natasha remarked dryly, watching Tony's frantic approach. The Leviathan leveled everything in its path as it dove toward the street. Dr. Banner began walking calmly toward the approaching flying whale, his pace steady, but Ethan stepped forward. Dr. Banner, leave this one to me, Ethan said, a dense orb of water hovering above his right hand. Steve looked taken aback, his brow furrowed. Son, that thing is no joke. Don't worry, Captain. Though tell Stark to clear the flight path, unless he wants another pierced heart, Ethan warned. He clasped his hands together in a prayer stance, then thrust them forward with lethal precision. That water stream attack that hit the destroyer armor, he's going to use that again, the captain realized, recalling the mission briefings. You heard him, Stark. Captain Rogers spoke into the intercom as Iron Man veered sharply away from Ethan's direct line of sight. Piercing water. Ethan chanted. A hyper-compressed stream of water erupted from his palms, screaming forward at the speed of sound. The jet pierced the Leviathan's armored skull and tunneled through its entire length until it exited from the rear. As the attack subsided, the dead Leviathan skidded to a halt mere inches from them. A heavy silence fell over the group, lingering until Thor finally broke it with a booming laugh. That was a fine attack. Having witnessed the fall of the beast, the Hulk emerged from Banner's skin at the side of the street, punctuating the kill by kicking the slain beast squarely in its maw. Immediately, Chitauri soldiers clinging to the beast's carcass launched themselves onto the facades of the surrounding buildings. The Avengers instinctively formed a defensive circle, with Ethan facing the looming silhouette of Stark Tower. 10 more Leviathans emerged from the portal above, their gargantuan forms casting massive, rhythmic shadows over the crumbling city. The Avengers took notice of the escalating threat. "Call it, Captain," Tony said. He was still mentally processing the mechanics of that high-speed water jet, but he decided to deal with the logistics later. Maybe I could replicate that pressure using Stark tech? He wondered. "All right, listen up. Until we can close that portal up there, we're in containment," Captain America commanded, stepping into his role as leader. "Barton, I want you on that roof. Call out patterns and strays. Stark, you've got the left perimeter. Anything that gets more than 3 blocks out, you turn it back or turn it to ash. Park, you've got the right. Same rules apply." Rogers instructed. He had seen the grainy footage of Ethan fighting the destroyer armor and his display of power right now. He knew Park could hold a flank. "Wanna give me a lift?" Clint asked Tony. "All right. Better clench up, Legolas," Tony remarked as he grabbed the archer and took flight. Ethan followed using his wings, though he glanced back one last time toward the Hulk. The giant simply let out a guttural grunt of approval. "Thor, you've got to bottleneck that portal. Slow them down. You've got the lightning, light the bastards up." Rogers shouted as Thor ascended toward the clouds. "You and me," the captain said, turning to Natasha. "We stay here. We keep the fighting on the ground." "And Hulk?" Captain ordered with a grim smile. "Smash." Ethan summoned his 3-section staff and dove into the fray. He cut the first swath through a Chitauri squadron so fast that their bodies only slid apart a second later, delayed by the sheer speed of the strike. Then the roar of another Leviathan echoed as it barreled toward a building crowded with civilians. But before it could breach the glass, Maharaga manifested in its path, cleaving the beast's head in two with the sword of extermination. Ethan took to the sky, his 3-section staff locked end-to-end to act as a long polearm. He spotted 2 more Leviathans demolishing structures on opposite sides of the block. Tora and Per emerged from his shadow, flanking him instantly. "Don't use any high-output attacks. Prioritize civilian rescue," Ethan commanded, his eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield as both his Shikigamis took on each Leviathan. Maharaga stepped up behind him as he finalized the plan. "I am going to find Loki. You go deal with those 3. Ethan said, pointing toward the 3 searing Leviathans swarming near the south side of the perimeter. Maharaga didn't need to be told twice. He leaped into the fray with a toothy, predatory grin. Ethan spotted a squadron of Chitauri chariots flying toward the bank and summoned tens of thousands of his swarm moth Psyche. Even 1 or 2 of these Shikigami are capable of draining the life out of an ordinary human in seconds. And though the Chitauri are partially cybernetic, a swarm reaching nearly 100,000 could easily overwhelm them through sheer numbers. The moth Shikigami intercepted the incoming squad, fluttering past them in a dense, shimmering cloud. Once the swarm cleared, all that remained of the soldiers were hollowed-out husks. On the opposite side, Poe was utilizing the cursed spirits Ethan had commanded him to absorb over the last 4 years to combat a Leviathan. He specifically deployed a massive, one-eyed cursed spirit as a battering ram, using its colossal size to crash into the armored beast. Meanwhile, Tora had dragged his Leviathan into his gargantuan mirror dimension, where he utilized a combination of raw strength, speed, and mystic arts to cave in the giant whale's skull. Ethan had realized long ago he couldn't use his unique cursed energy trait when fighting in public. Unlike Thor's lightning, which can be directed or dispersed, Ethan's purple lightning discharge clings to his skin in this state. While he is active, any human within his immediate vicinity would be instantly electrocuted to death. Finally, he heard the sharp crack of an explosion and watched as Loki plummeted onto the Stark Tower terrace. It seemed Hawkeye had finally secured his iconic revenge against the trickster god. Chapter 40, The Battle of New York, Part 2. In the original timeline, it was Gideon Malik who authorized the nuclear strike on Manhattan, but with him dead, Ethan realized he could no longer rely on a nuke to end the fight. He could no longer count on an external force to turn the Chitauri mothership into a miniature sun, thereby severing the head of the hive and instantly eliminating the remaining Leviathans and foot soldiers. Maybe the nuclear strike will still be authorized. After all, those entrenched in power will always prioritize their own perceived safety above all else. However, Ethan knew he could not afford to base the survival of Manhattan on hope alone. Ethan shot toward the Stark Tower, and as he landed, the 3-section staff and news wings dissolved back into his shadow. In their place, he now gripped a spear with purple lightning flickering violently around its tip. He had earlier released autonomous levitating Hattie and skull-cursed blades, imbued with the essence of the divine dogs, to prowl the battlefield. Alongside them, his swarm of 100,000 moth Shikigami worked tirelessly, clearing out Chitauri foot soldiers and chariots with clinical efficiency. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Rabbit Escape Shikigami stood guard over the New York Public Library, maintaining a massive healing sanctum through the synchronized use of RCT discs. With Maharaga, Tora, and Pa intercepting the heavy-hitting Leviathans, Ethan's flank remained perfectly secured, allowing him to focus entirely on the god of mischief. Though Ethan couldn't use his unique cursed energy trait in public, he could still utilize his cursed tools. News Spear had been optimized to the point where even someone with the negligible cursed energy of a regular civilian could wield it effectively. Ethan scanned the area, but the scepter was neither in Loki's hand nor anywhere in the immediate vicinity. A pocket seal, perhaps? He mused. He knew it wasn't hidden by a simple illusion. If it were, his kitsune would have sensed the magical fluctuation instantly. "Where is that scepter, Loki?" he asked, his voice low and grim. "Ethan Park." Loki spat the name out as he struggled to stand after the impact of Hawkeye's explosive arrow. "It seems Jogo is dead. I don't know what I expected from such dull creatures, but given how confident he was that he could kill you, you must be winded from that fight." Loki observed him for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "Or not," he finally conceded. "I asked you a question," Ethan spoke. Before Loki could react, Ethan was standing beside him. With a singular, blurred motion of the spear, the god of mischief's left leg was severed. "Ah!" Loki screamed frantically, collapsing to the floor. Ethan reached into his shadow, retrieved an RCT disc, and slammed it onto the raw stump. Loki's sobs of pain subsided as the tissue knit itself back together in a clean stump, but he still glared up with venomous hatred. If looks could kill, Ethan would be dead. "Next time it will be your hands," Ethan said coldly. This wasn't a movie where a charming persona made Loki look endearing, or the future where one out of trillions of Loki became the god of stories. Looking down at the destruction and sensing the slaughter below, Ethan saw only the truth. This Loki was evil. "Make a binding vow," Loki gasped, his pragmatism overriding his pride. He could sense that Ethan's killing intent was real. He would actually kill him, unlike Thor, who still viewed him as a brother who had simply gone astray. "What is stopping you from killing me the moment you get your hands on my scepter? Make a binding vow that you won't kill me after I hand it over." Ethan thought about it, his need to protect overriding his need to punish. Fine." Ethan Park entered into a binding vow with the god of lies. The terms were simple. As long as Loki surrendered the scepter, Ethan would not kill him today. Ending the war by closing that portal was far more important than executing a lone commander. Loki manifested the scepter from a pocket seal and handed it over. Ethan didn't wait for a preamble. He immediately summoned Fourth Toad Reversal, the corrosive widow. A giant, grotesque spider manifested from his shadow. Wait, what is that creature?" Loki spoke frantically, appearing more disturbed by the presence of the massive arachnid than his own recently severed foot. Perhaps the RCT discs had worked too well. "She is here to keep an eye on you," Ethan replied coldly. That finally made Loki snap. "I am a god sorcerer and I will not be bullied by a—" He didn't get to finish before the widow launched a massive, sticky web at the rogue prince, pinning him firmly to the wall. These were no ordinary threads. The webbing was strong enough to restrain Tora if the tiger didn't utilize mystic arts, a fact they had experimented with much to the feline Shikigami's displeasure. As Loki continued to screech, Ethan stepped out into the clearing holding the scepter. He looked upward toward the swirling wormhole and then at the summit of Stark Tower. Pivoting on his heels, he leaped with explosive force, leaving spiderweb cracks in the concrete behind him, before landing directly in front of the Tesseract's portal generator. He looked to the side. Dr. Selvig lay there with blood streaming from the left side of his face, having lost consciousness from a severe head injury. Ethan approached the doctor and placed an RCT valve over the wound. The injury began to visibly knit together and soon, Eric Selvig regained consciousness. "The scepter? Loki's scepter." Those were Selvig's first words. He looked at Ethan and the weapon he held, but his next words were unexpected. "It won't work, he made me remove it. The failsafe. There is no safety to cut the power source. Once the portal is opened, it cannot be closed. I am sorry. I am so sorry." Dr. Selvig spoke between bouts of sobbing. What? No safety cut off, that's different form movie, that means the scepter is useless, Ethan thought with a punched nose. It's all right. It wasn't your fault, Ethan assured him calmly. At those words, Eric began to weep uncontrollably, the weight of his forced actions finally crashing down on him. Sleep, Ethan whispered, touching Selvig's forehead and infusing it with a gentle pulse of cursed energy to induce a deep, dreamless slumber. He then summoned dozens of rabbit escape Shikigami. The flurry of white fur surrounded the unconscious scientist as Ethan ordered them to carry Dr. Selvig safely to the New York Public Library, ensuring he would remain protected within the healing zone. So that was your plan? You really thought I would let him build a failsafe? Loki's voice drifted from behind him, clearly a projection. Even without looking, Ethan could tell, he was smirking as if he had already won the war in its entirety. Up above, 15 more Leviathans could be seen breaching the event horizon of the wormhole, their massive armored frames eclipsing the sun as they descended toward the city. Loki must have realized I needed the scepter to interfere with the Tesseract, so he tricked me into a binding vow to ensure his survival. A final desperate gambit from a dying god, Ethan thought, his eyes hardening as he let go of the scepter. What do you find so entertaining? Such disregard for human life, what is so amusing about this? Ethan asked rhetorically with his back turned toward the illusion. Until I can close that portal, I will simply kill anything that crosses it. Witness the pinnacle of jujitsu, Jotun, Ethan said, finally turning toward Loki's image and forming a sovereign seal with his hands. Domain expansion, Chimera Sovereign Garden. The surrounding rooftop was flooded with a thick liquid-like negative palette shadow, transforming the entire environment into an extension of his 10 shadows technique as a 100-meter of domain took hold. Illusion? No. This is no mere illusion, Loki thought, his mind reeling as the reality of the domain settled over him. From the depths of Ethan's shifting shadow, 9 Tora pounced forth, followed by hundreds of dragon Ryujin and hundreds of gravity sheep Ares. The sheer scale of the manifestation was staggering. Meanwhile, the number of his moth Shikigami continued to multiply until the swarm reached nearly 500,000. A shimmering cloud of death that blotted out the remaining light on the terrace. Ethan ordered his moth psyche to form a suffocating, dense cloud around the aperture of the portal. Anything attempting to cross the threshold was instantly drained into a hollow husk. Should any survivors manage to slip through using a Leviathan as cover, they would find a legion of Tora waiting to drag them into the mirror dimension. There, the invaders would encounter his Ryujin, Shikigami capable of massive scale would release that leeches life force from any organic being, or his Ares capable of generating localized gravity wells to crush opponents into paste. Upon realizing the scepter could not offset the Tesseract's accelerator, Ethan enacted 2 spontaneous binding vows to recalibrate his domain. First vow, in exchange for foregoing the ability to summon multiple versions of Maharaga within the domain, the singular general's adaptation speed would be increased tenfold. Second vow, in exchange for limiting his Tora summons to single digits rather than hundreds, the Shikigami's prowess in energy manipulation would increase by a power of 3. Equals Tora original prowess, superscript 3. Both vows took hold instantly. He planned to use the hyper-accelerated Maharaga to cleave through the Tesseract's energy shield once the adaptation was complete. Simultaneously, having the buff Tora on standby was a necessary precaution. Their enhanced energy control would be vital to containing the fallout should the excited space stone react violently to their interference and attempt to detonate. 5 minutes later. What is happening at the portal? Natasha asked Steve. They had just been discussing her hitching a ride there via a hijacked Chitauri chariot, but the plan seemed suddenly redundant. The relentless army that had been pouring through the rift had ceased their advance entirely. Is it over? Barton's voice crackled over the comms from his rooftop vantage point. Odin's eye. What are those creatures? Thor exclaimed as he touched down beside the captain and Natasha. Even for a god, the sight of the shimmering swarm moths was unsettling. What creatures? More aliens? Tony asked, joining the group as Hawkeye descended to meet them. The fighting on the street level had reached a sudden, eerie standstill. The swarm moths were systematically scouring the ruins, leaving only the husks of any remaining enemy soldiers in their wake. Thor looked at his teammates, realizing the disconnect. He spoke without much hesitation. Ah. I forgot that most Midgardians lack the sight to perceive cursed energy or cursed spear. Thor didn't get to finish his explanation as the Hulk made his entry, slamming into him with enough force to launch the God of Thunder into the rubble of an adjacent building and then let out a grunt of approval.
Look, if you've actually made it this far into the video and you're still here, come on then, hit subscribe. And honestly, if you think a friend of yours would like this, go on and share it with them. It really helps out. Right, I'm done. I'll get out of your hair now so you can get back to the good stuff. But seriously, stick around till the end. It's well worth it.
Chapter 42, Aftermath, Part 1. Ethan didn't react to the interruption. With his back still turned toward Fury, he spoke with a calm, measured tone. It is only polite to introduce yourself before barging in on another conversation. Ethan finally turned to look at the man who had spoken and raised a skeptical eyebrow. Behind the director stood two more men, both clad in stern black coats. "Are you hurt somewhere?" Ethan asked, his voice devoid of urgency. "What?" "No." Fury didn't even get to finish his sentence before a dozen escape rabbit Shikigami swarmed the room, lifting him and his agents off their feet. The rabbits carried them bodily out of the healing area of the library in a flurry of white fur and chaos. Ethan turned his attention back toward the Elizabeth Lale look-alike, shouting over his shoulder as the doors began to swing shut. "Whatever your business is, it will have to wait until I am done here." For some reason, his mind raced back to the miniature sun he had created during the battle. Why did I say that? Why did I tell her I was human? He thought. No human could do what he had just done to those ships, and no human could do what he was doing now for the wounded. So why did I lie? But before the door could swing shut completely, Fury's voice cut through the air. "It's Phil. He's dead." That name made Ethan freeze. His hands, still hovering over the blonde woman's wound, stopped their output of reverse cursed technique. Ethan turned away from the patient. From the depth of his shadow, another round deer manifested, stepping forward to take his place and continue the healing process as he made his way toward the closing door. As Ethan reduced his domain to a microscopic level. As he reached the threshold, he looked down at his hand. I stopped being human a long time ago, Ethan realized. Even though he knew he was theoretically capable of generating attacks reaching 65,000 degrees Celsius, seeing that attack with his own eyes for the first time had fundamentally changed the way he perceived himself. Ethan recalled the details of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. television series. Phil Coulson was brought back to life through Project TAHITI, a top-secret S.H.I.E.L.D. initiative ordered by Nick Fury to revive a fallen Avenger. After Loki killed Coulson during the events of the Avengers, he was resuscitated using a drug derived from the blood of a deceased Kree alien, which painstakingly repaired his damaged organs. However, the Kree blood also induced severe psychological side effects, including a compulsive urge to carve alien symbols representing their lost city. Ethan wondered, had he ever used his reverse curse technique RCT to truly revive someone before? Was such a feat even possible within the laws of jujitsu? He knew Sukuna had revived Itadori, but that was because the King of Curses had prevented Yuji's soul from crossing into the afterlife using his innate domain. Similarly, when Yuta revived Yuji, he had done so the very instant he killed him. It was more akin to a doctor shocking a patient's heart the moment it stopped rather than a true resurrection. But Coulson had been revived by GH325 after being dead for several days. If healing the physical wounds could serve as a bridge that forced the soul to remain, then perhaps all he had to do was flood the vessel with an overwhelming amount of positive energy. Ethan stepped out of the room to find the main hall swarming with more S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and two young interns in civilian clothing. He gave them a side glance and recognized them immediately. Fitzsimmons. A tragic love story in the making, he thought. The Avengers were also present, save for the Hulk. They stood over a bound Loki, whose leg remained severed. Ethan had previously ordered his spider Shikigami to dissolve their webs and retreat into the shadows the moment the heroes arrived, leaving the god of mischief incapacitated on the floor. Ethan and Thor locked eyes. Thor clearly wanted to ask Ethan to heal his brother, but after the devastation Loki had unleashed upon Earth, he couldn't bring himself to impose. He quickly averted his gaze, looking ashamed. Ethan released a long sigh and walked toward them. He understood Thor's silent plea. It cost him nothing to comply, and having a powerful ally from the stars never hurt. With his hands already enveloped in the glowing hum of reverse cursed technique, he brushed them over Loki's stump. The leg regenerated instantly, though the fabric of his trousers did not. Loki quickly used an illusion to cover his nakedness. Despite the vast differences in their biology, even a Jotun could be mended by the output of positive energy. Thor looked at him with a deeply grateful expression. "Thank you, Ethan. It seems my debt to you has only grown larger," Thor noted, his voice thick with relief. "Heh. Don't sweat it," Ethan replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. Seeing the regeneration occur with their own eyes, Tony Stark's expression turned purely analytical. "What did you do, Peter Pan?" It seems Stark has already chosen a nickname for me." "Well, if you must know, reverse curse technique cannot, to my knowledge, be replicated by technology, Mr. Stark." "Reverse curse technique?" Gemma Simmons piped up from behind him, her voice brimming with scientific curiosity. Ethan looked toward the duo. They had those eager, puppy dog eyes. "Nope, not falling for that." It seemed Stark was already winding up for a rant, likely listing his numerous master's degrees and PhDs to prove that science could eventually replicate RCT. Ethan wasn't entirely dismissive of the claim. After all, this was the MCU, where the line between magic and quantum physics was often non-existent, but he didn't have the time for a lecture. "Enough questions. Do you have Agent Coulson's body here?" Ethan asked firmly, directing his gaze toward Fury. Standing beside the director were Natasha and Hawkeye, both watching him with unreadable expressions. Ethan had little patience for corporations or organizations that believed they could command others based on some imagined inherent authority. However, individuals like Coulson represented the human element, the dedication, and the operational backbone of S.H.I.E.L.D. while fighting among gods and monsters alike. He knew exactly what kind of man Coulson was, perhaps even better than the man knew himself. 2 more agents joined the group, one of them being Maria Hill. She shot a glance at Fury, her eyes clearly questioning the wisdom of this decision, but she followed suit without a word. The body of Agent Coulson was rolled into the center of the room on a metal stretcher. His skin was pale and his face had gone cold. It was clear he had been dead for several hours. The heavy silence of the morgue seemed to follow the gurney into the hall. Finally, Captain Rogers spoke, his voice hushed with a mix of hope and skepticism. "Can you bring him back?" Steve couldn't quite fathom someone being retrieved from beyond the veil. Then again, until 2 days ago, he hadn't believed in aliens either. "I won't know until I try," Ethan replied simply. His hands became entirely enveloped in a thick white aura of reverse cursed technique, which he pressed firmly against Coulson's chest. The jagged wound from the scepter began to knit itself back together, muscle and skin weaving shut in a matter of seconds, and skin started to get a healthy glow. Loki's eyes widened. Seeing the wound visibly close, everyone in the hall went silent. However, Ethan noticed a critical problem. Phil still wasn't breathing. Even with a perfectly healed heart, his brain had been deprived of oxygen for far too long to simply restart on its own. Partial summoning, Chimera Samsara. A complex chimera, a fusion of Maharaga, round deer, and escape rabbit. This wasn't a frontline combatant, but a specialized healer type. By utilizing a partial summoning for this specific chimera, Ethan could personally output a refined grade of RCT capable of curing terminal illnesses that standard techniques could not reach. He hoped it would be enough for this scenario. The Wheel of Harmony materialized, hovering above Ethan's head as he began applying the potent RCT directly to Coulson's brain, targeting the neural pathways and oxygen-starved cells. Click! Maharaga's wheel spun once with a sharp mechanical click, and Ethan smiled. A few seconds later, the silence of the morgue was shattered. Phil Coulson gasped, taking his first ragged breath since his resurrection. Just then, Bruce Banner walked in, his clothes clearly worn and ill-fitting from having to borrow a larger size in haste. He caught the final moments of the miracle. As he looked at Ethan, a surge of pride washed over him. He locked eyes with Tony Stark and offered a subtle shrug. He and Stark had discussed Ethan while tracking the Tesseract, and Banner had mentioned the boy's ability to heal terminal illnesses, a claim Stark had promptly dismissed. He was proven wrong. 1 day ago, the lab. In the lab, Banner and Stark had set to work locating the Tesseract. "The gamma readings are definitely consistent with Selvig's reports," Dr. Banner noted, examining the data from Loki's scepter. "But it's going to take weeks to process." If we bypass their mainframe and direct route to the Homeric clusters, we can clock this at around 600 teraflops, Stark replied, solving the complex calculation as if it were an afterthought. All I packed was a toothbrush, Banner said, stifling a laugh at the sheer absurdity of Stark's resources. You should come by Stark Tower sometime. Top 10 floors are all R&D. You'll love it, it's Candy Land, Tony suggested. Thanks, but I'd rather not, Banner replied with a hesitant edge. The Hulk was never meant to live among a civilian population. Yeah, I promise a stress-free environment. I have to ask though, you know this park character, right? What is he? Stark asked. He'd seen the footage of the kid with the hovering wheel who had saved him and stood alongside the Hulk in Harlem. Banner looked at him directly for the first time. He is a good kid. And he truly was. When Banner first learned about cursed spirits 4 years ago, he, Tora, and Ethan had spent 4 months collaborating to create the very glasses he was wearing now. During that time, Tora had shared stories of Ethan's travels. Though Tora meant it as simple conversation, Banner had been shocked by the sheer number of people the kid helped daily. He could actually help you with your heart problem, I think, Banner suggested, tapping his hand against his own chest to signify the arc reactor. So this healing thing, is it for real? Stark asked with clear skepticism. Yeah, it is. From healing patients considered incurable by doctors, he could easily mend your physical wounds. This was a subject Banner had discussed with Ethan personally. Ethan had explained that the cure wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution, every case was unique. He warned that if he made even a slight error while outputting reverse curse technique, he might actually cause more harm than good. Banner had spent the majority of those 4 months in an astral form. While in that state, one can perceive the supernatural and see cursed spirits or shikigamis that remain invisible to the human eye. I call bull, Stark retorted. And a good kid, huh? Well, if you're working with me, I also promise no surprises, Stark added, though he punctuated the sentence by prodding Banner in the back with a taser pen. Back to present. As Ethan watched from a distance, observing the agents hovering anxiously around Agent Coulson, he finally realized the answer to his dilemma regarding his own humanity. He understood now that hedonism comes easily to men with power. It is the simplest path to take when one stands above the rest. But showing true kindness in a world this cruel, to be human in the world of monsters, Ethan realized that takes real, unwavering strength. Chapter 43, Aftermath, Part 2. In the chaotic, smoke-filled aftermath of the Battle of New York, reality was becoming increasingly difficult to parse for the operatives of S.H.I.E.L.D., and even more so for the Hydra loyalists embedded within them. While the primary group of Avengers stood inside the New York Public Library, witnessing the resurrection of Agent Phil Coulson, a very different drama was unfolding across town. At the Stark Tower, the STRIKE team, led by Rumlow and accompanied by the agent Jasper Sitwell, had secured the Loki's scepter. They moved towards the main elevator, intent on whisking the scepter away to a secure Hydra-controlled facility under the guise of S.H.I.E.L.D. custody. The elevator doors hissed open, and the atmosphere instantly shifted. Standing there, stoic and commanding, was Captain Steve Rogers. When they got inside and elevator doors closed, Captain informed the team that Secretary Alexander Pierce had personally requested him to take custody of the scepter for further safeguarding. The strike team was, of course, incooperative. But then Rogers leaned in towards Sitwell. In the cramped, tense silence of the elevator, he whispered 2 words that sent a shockwave through his body. Hail Hydra. The looks on their faces were a mixture of sheer terror and religious awe, the sudden realization that the Sentinel of Liberty, the paragon of American virtue, might have been a deep-cover sleeper agent for their cause since 1945. Stunned into total compliance, they handed over the case without a single question. Of course, the captain in that elevator was a fabrication formed in combination with Ethan's kitsune and Tora. Why go to such elaborate trouble? For Ethan, the reasons were fourfold. First, the pure, unadulterated comedy of the situation made the effort entirely worth it. Watching the most cynical, cold-blooded traitors in the world fall for a secret handshake was a masterpiece of irony. And it was the perfect opportunity to recreate a certain legendary scenario from a certain movie. He wanted them to believe, if only for a few hours, that their greatest enemy was actually their greatest secret asset. The second reason was the long game. With Ethan currently performing healing across town, his alibi was secured. Even Banner didn't know about Tora's ability to cast illusions. It wasn't that he couldn't have simply transported or sealed the scepter beforehand, but he knew that doing so would have sparked immediate resistance from S.H.I.E.L.D. and even the Avengers. He could have easily forced the issue and most likely emerged victorious, but recalling the famous words of the Italian Renaissance philosopher and diplomat Niccolò Machiavelli, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception," he stayed his hand. Thirdly, the psychological fallout was priceless. Later that day, when Sitwell and the strike team eventually encountered the real Steve Rogers, after Loki and Thor had already departed for Asgard with the Tesseract, and mentioned the handoff, the confusion was absolute. Watching the Hydra High Command scramble to figure out if they had been tricked by the god of mischief, while desperately trying to calculate how to recover that scepter, was truly a sight to behold. Lastly, the absence of Ultron didn't hurt. Though Ethan harbored lingering doubts about whether preventing that specific catastrophe would truly make a difference in the long run. After all, Stark's need to create Ultron would only increase after this alien invasion. And a rogue AI was hardly a novel threat within the Marvel multiverse. Ida, from the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. series, immediately came to mind as a prime example of synthetic ambition gone wrong. The next day, the early morning in Camartage was alive with motion. Students drifted through doorways and gathered in the courtyards to practice complex spells. Ethan sat at his usual sanctuary on the terrace, a secluded spot where he went whenever he required solitude to think. Between his palms, the Mind Stone hovered, pulsing with a faint glow as it levitated. Suddenly, a shimmering orange portal sparked into existence behind him. Though he didn't turn to face the intruder, he already knew exactly who had arrived. "What do you intend to do with that?" the Ancient One asked, her hands tucked behind her back. "Originally, I was thinking of destroying it. End the endgame before it even begins," Ethan said, finally turning to meet her gaze directly. "You cannot see past the moment of your own death, but I have seen what happens." He paused, waiting for the Ancient One to give him a subtle nod of permission to continue. "It will likely not happen the same way now. After all, I have already changed and intend to change a great deal. But what if there is a possibility that we could eradicate all cursed spirits? I have considered this before, by fundamentally altering how humanity interacts with cursed energy. Using all 6 Infinity Stones, it should be possible, right?" Ethan asked, beckoning the Mind Stone back into his hand. "It is true. Cursed energy exists within alien life as well, but it is only humans who leak that energy, allowing it to coalesce into cursed spirits," the Ancient One replied, pacing slowly around him. "In other words, Earth is the sole cradle where cursed spirits are born. And yes, it is entirely possible to fundamentally change how humanity interacts with that energy, provided you wield all 6 stones." "So, are you going to tell me that man was not meant to meddle or something similar?" Ethan asked, clearly a little surprised by the directness of her answer. "I cannot tell you what you must or must not do, Ethan. However, you alone must bear the burden of your choices, whether they prove to be right or wrong," the Ancient One spoke, glancing up at the rising morning sun before returning her gaze to him. "The protection of the Time Stone is the sacred duty of the Sorcerer Supreme, but I doubt Doctor Strange would stop you if you somehow collected the other 5 stones and presented a reliable way to purge all cursed spirits." Saying that, the Ancient One turned and swept her hand to open a portal back to the main hall of Camartage. "Have a cup of honey tea before you go to visit Miss Guinevere," she added casually as she stepped through the golden gateway. Ethan stood stunned for a long moment. That was the name of the blonde woman he had healed the other day, the one who, after he returned from resurrecting Phil Coulson, had given him her number. She had asked him to call her for a date. He wasn't entirely sure. But if there was a way to see for certain, he looked the Ancient One in the eye with a flicker of hope. "No, and I am most certainly not using the Time Stone to assist your love life," she spoke firmly, and his hopes were instantly shattered. Later that day, as Ethan made his way through the streets of New York with his red hoodie pulled up, he paused to watch a television through the cracked glass window of an appliance store. The news channels were obsessed with the Avengers, and apparently he was now counted among them. "Yeah, I saw the guy. He had wings flying straight toward the wormhole, and then everything became hot. It only lasted few seconds, but I was left panting on the ground. That was crazy, man. A deer saved my life, literally. My right arm was completely gone and now it is back. So what? All this is their fault? Captain, America saved my life. Wherever he is or wherever any of them are, I would just like to say thank you. It seemed some people around New York had spotted him above Stark Tower while they could still perceive cursed energy, having briefly glimpsed the span of news wings. Ethan looked at the text he had received earlier from Guinevere and checked the location of the surprisingly intact coffee shop on the other side of the road. She was already there. It seemed she had already ordered herself a drink. He checked the time on his phone. He was, in fact, earlier than their decided time. Ethan crossed the road, not knowing for the first time exactly what his future would hold. Inside the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier communication hub, the cold, dimly lit room where Director Nick Fury typically receives mandates from the World Security Council, the air was thick with tension. The Council had previously authorized a nuclear strike on Manhattan the moment 15 additional Leviathans began emerging from the portal. One of the birds from the helicarrier's own deck had attempted to take off to deliver the payload, but Fury himself had neutralized the jet before it could even leave the runway. "Where are the Avengers?" the councilman on the right demanded, his face a flickering hologram of judgment. "I am not currently tracking their whereabouts," Fury answered, his voice devoid of apology. "I'd say they have earned a leave of absence." "And the Tesseract? What of Loki's scepter? Have you had any luck locating our resident shapeshifter?" the councilwoman asked sharply. "The Tesseract is where it belongs, out of our reach. As for the scepter, we are still investigating. Agents witnessed Loki transform into Captain Rogers during the transition, so the prevailing theory is that he currently has it in his possession," Fury replied. "Giving the Tesseract away was not your call to make," the councilman in the middle interjected, his tone icy. "I didn't make the call," Fury countered. "I just didn't argue with the god who did." "So you simply allowed him to take the Tesseract? And the war criminal, Loki? The one who may or may not have tricked your agents into returning his scepter? Loki should be answering for his crimes against Earth," the councilwoman pressed. "Oh, I think he will be. As for the scepter, Loki wasn't carrying it when he was being transported to the park, which suggests he might have stashed it somewhere on Earth," Fury replied calmly. "I don't think you quite understand the magnitude of what you have unleashed upon the world by letting the Avengers loose. They are dangerous," the councilwoman warned. "They surely are. The whole world knows it. In fact, every world knows it," Fury said, a hint of a pride crossing his face. "Was that the point of all this? To make a statement?" the councilman in the middle asked. "A promise," Fury replied simply, turning his back on the monitors and exiting the conference room. Chapter 44 of Clowns and Relics. 1 year later. Bangor, Maine. Ethan was currently deployed on a subjugation mission targeting an unregistered cursed spirit. The reason the reconnaissance team had been unable to determine the spirit's grade was unusual, to say the least, which was exactly why he had been called in to intervene. The cursed spirit had deployed a massive barrier, encasing the entire town of Bangor. While a spirit manifesting a barrier was rare, it wasn't entirely unheard of. After all, nearly every special grade possesses at least an incomplete domain. However, the sheer scale of this particular construct would easily categorize it among the most exceptional cases Ethan had ever encountered. Ethan was well acquainted with the architecture of this town through the horror film IT. Although the city of Derry in Stephen King's novel is fictional, it was famously inspired by the atmosphere of Bangor. The author had drawn from the local environment, the sprawling sewer systems and the Gothic architecture, while residing there. In Ethan's previous life, the film was released in 2017. However, in this reality, the fusion of advanced technology and the pervasive horror that plagued the world after the events of May 4, 2012, had prompted producers to accelerate their plans. They chose to strike while the iron was hot, and the gamble paid off. IT became the highest-grossing film of 2013. Unfortunately, the massive success of the movie came with a dark price. The collective fear of the masses had given birth to numerous Grade 1 and Grade 2 imaginary vengeful cursed spirits. That wasn't even touching upon the exponential surge of spirits born in New York following the alien invasion. Earlier this year, Ethan had personally exorcised a special grade birthed from the fear of deep space itself. As he looked toward the shrouded town, Ethan felt a grim certainty. By the end of this year, a special grade on par with Dagon or Hanami would likely be born from the world's escalating nightmares. Tora manifested from Ethan's shadow, spending a long minute examining the structural integrity of the barrier before finally speaking. You could simply brute force your way in, shatter the barrier from the outside, or simply use a sling ring to port inside. But I assume we're trying to avoid making a grand entrance? Tora asked. Yes. If I shatter it, the spirit might go on a rampage, and we have to assume it can sense the specific fluctuations of dimensional energy within its barrier. It could endanger the civilians the moment it realizes its perimeter has been breached, Ethan answered, his eyes scanning the veil. While it was entirely possible that the cursed spirit lacked the refinement to detect them if they entered via a gateway, they had to operate under the assumption that it could. In this line of work, the stakes were far too high for a gamble. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best, he added. Then we could simply bypass it by digging deep underground and passing beneath the foundation, Tora suggested, offering a practical solution. Well, if we're going through the earth, there is an easier way, though it's a bit disgusting, Ethan said. He began channeling Reverse Curse Technique (RCT) through Nu, triggering its curse technique reversal. In a swirl of his shadow, the sandworm, Jorman, manifested. Though it wasn't its usual size, the creature unhinged its massive maw, instantly grasping its master's intent through their shared mental link. Jorman possessed the unique ability to swim through solid earth as effortlessly as if it were water. Gazing into the saliva-slicked mouth of the worm, Tora began sinking back into the safety of the Ethan's shadow. Speak for yourself, Ethan. I'll be waiting in the comfort of your shadow, he remarked, completely submerging himself. Traitor, Ethan muttered under his breath. Ethan couldn't simply use shadow manipulation to enter. The fluctuation in cursed energy would likely alert the entity inside. If the spirit had deployed a barrier of this magnitude solo, it was undoubtedly a special grade. Ethan's plan was calculated. He would first shrink the sandworm until it was roughly his own size. Then he would encase the creature within a layer of hollow trace and use its body as a makeshift vessel to slip past the barrier without alerting the spirit. Naturally, he ensured he was fully encased within the hollow trace as well, masking their presence entirely as they dove into the dirt. Hollow Trace can only be deployed for his small shikigamis like Chimera Reiju or Rabbit Escape, but Ethan could personally use it on anyone he touches. 15 minutes later, Ethan was tracking the dense cursed energy signature of a special grade into the depths of the tunnels. The atmosphere was oppressive and dark, thick with a horrid, cloying stench of dead bodies. Suddenly, the environment around him froze. Color bled from the world, leaving everything in stark black and white, reminiscent of an old film. A domain expansion, Ethan thought. The cursed spirit manifested, its form deeply disturbing. It possessed a human body topped with a neck as long as a giraffe's, which dangled limply from left to right, then back again like a damn pendulum. It shambled slowly toward him as Ethan observed with a steady gaze. Thud. 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 When the spirit's head finally swung to the center, its eyes locked onto his. As it drew closer, it morphed, shape-shifting into an incarnation of Pennywise, standing 8 feet tall with a single red balloon gripped in its hand. What? What scares you? The cursed spirit shrieked, its maw distending unnaturally wide. A domain that imposes non-violence on both parties until I answer the spirit's question. Ethan analyzed. Ethan simply smiled. It seemed the spirit utilized illusions to manifest its victims' deepest phobias. Blind dates, he replied nonchalantly. Instantly, the non-violence pact shattered. Hundreds of swords materialized inches from Ethan, diving toward him at blinding speed. Ethan locked eyes with the Pennywise clown spirit. Swish! In the next heartbeat, the spirit and Ethan had switched places. After Maharaga had adapted to the Space Stone's energy, it had provided Ethan with a model for spatial manipulation. Teleportation via switching places with both animate and inanimate objects. It functions similarly to the curse technique Boogie Woogie, though unlike to do, Ethan didn't need to clap to trigger the effect. Furthermore, he could switch positions with objects entirely devoid of cursed energy. Ethan observed the struggling spirit with indifference. You aren't going to die from just that, are you? He mused, watching the cursed spirit flail uselessly, impaled by the blades of its own diverted attack. Ethan turned his back on the creature, beginning to walk away. Pathetic. Finish it, Maharaga. The divine general erupted from the shadows directly beneath the spirit. His sword of extermination connected with the creature's torso before Maharaga's head had even fully emerged from the shadow. In the next heartbeat, the imaginary special-grade clown spirit was exorcised, its form dissolving into nothingness. Ethan flickered from his position, reappearing instantly at the tunnel's entrance. He tilted his head back, his gaze piercing the sky. "The veil is coming down," he observed. It seemed the cursed spirit had intended to trap the residents of Bangor, preventing them from fleeing once the disappearances became too frequent to ignore. Empty-handed, he could tell, the death toll had likely already climbed into the dozens, mostly children. Just then, Ethan felt a sharp mental tug from one of his marked canae, but the sensation wasn't originating from Earth. Thor was signaling him. It seemed the Dark Elves had finally made their move. After quickly firing off a message to the reconnaissance team to confirm the mission's success and notify them of his potential MIA status for the time being, Ethan prepared to depart. Utilizing shadow manipulation, he vanished instantly from the damp entrance of the tunnel. A heartbeat later, he materialized within the gilded, soaring hallway of the Asgardian royal castle. One day ago, Jane Foster was having a truly terrible couple of days. She, her intern Darcy, and Darcy's own intern Ian, had detected a localized spatial anomaly. This discovery led Jane directly to the ether, hidden within the bowels of an abandoned warehouse in London. She had been drawn to this specific location because her scientific instruments detected a breach in space-time, a signature remarkably similar to the Bifrost's arrival. However, this tear was caused by the approaching convergence. While investigating, she was subsequently pulled through a portal to the ancient, hidden resting place of the ether, where Thor's grandfather Bor had originally entombed it. Thor arrived shortly after and whisked her away to Asgard once the ether violently repelled the police officers attempting to arrest her. However, the Infinity Stone was effectively killing her. It was defending itself by draining her life force. Asgard's finest healers were unable to diagnose her condition, concluding only that she could not survive the sheer volume of energy coursing through her. Ultimately, Odin, the king of Asgard, appeared and saw the repulsion with his eyes and explained the nature of the infection. He revealed that there are relics that predate the universe itself, and what resided within her was one of them, the ether. Odin spoke of how the 9 realms are not eternal, they had a dawn and they will surely have a dusk. But before that dawn, the Dark Elves reigned supreme and unchallenged. These ancient beings utilized the very relic now coursing through her veins. The ether, as Odin called it, possesses the power to transmute matter into dark matter, fueling its strength by siphoning the life force of its host. Their leader, Malekith, once sought to use this power to plunge the entire universe back into an age of eternal darkness. Now, as she sat atop the plush cushions of a sofa in a suite reserved for royal guests, staring out at the countless stars of the Asgardian night sky, a cold premonition of something terrible began to take hold. Though she couldn't shake a single nagging thought, maybe she should have simply finished her date with Richard and gone home to wallow in a bucket of ice cream instead. Chapter 45, Ethan's Arsenal. Domain and Anti-Domain Techniques. Simple domain neutralizes the guaranteed hit function by creating a small, separate space within an opponent's barrier. Falling Blossom Emotion, an anti-domain technique passed down among the big 3 families. Unlike Simple Domain, it doesn't expand space. Instead, it automatically counterattacks with cursed energy the moment a guaranteed hit makes contact. Hollow Wicker Basket, the precursor to Simple Domain, an ancient, effective anti-domain technique. Domain Amplification, a technique that envelopes the user to neutralize cursed techniques upon contact. Do Not Notice Me Barrier, a specialized veil designed for stealth and concealment. Graphite Blast, a high-density discharge capable of killing a special grade on direct impact. Reverse Curse Technique, RCT self-explanatory, the ability to convert negative energy into positive healing energy. Shadow Teleportation, manipulating the 10 shadows for instantaneous movement through the shadow realm. Eclipse, a binding vow for instantaneous teleportation, occurring in a billionth of a second. 2. The Open Barrier Domain. Open Barrier Domain Expansion. By permanently relinquishing a closed barrier, Ethan provides a theoretical escape route as a sacrifice. This vow increases his sure hit radius dramatically to 200 meters. Mobile Anchor. The domain treats Ethan as its central anchor, allowing the entire 200-meter field to move with him. Microscopic Domain. Ethan can shrink his boundary to a microscopic level, 0.000001 meter, though this is unsustainable for long durations. Chimera Sovereign Garden, a complex expansion similar in function to the Chimera Shadow Garden. 3. 10 Shadows Shikigami, Special Grade Foundation. Divine Dogs, Kuro and Shiro Special Grade individually. Rabbit Escape, Grade 4 individually/Special Grade Collective. Gamma, Toad Grade 1. Max Elephant, Special Grade. Great Serpent, Orochi Special Grade. Round Deer Special Grade. Piercing Ox, Special Grade. Tiger Funeral, Tora Special Grade. Pseudo Six Eyes. Divine General Maharaga, Special Grade. 4. Advanced Shikigami Applications. A. Mystic Arts through Tora. Tora serves as a conduit for the mystic arts, possessing mastery over all spells, excluding time stone-reliant magic. Constructs, Eldritch Constructs, Tau Mandalas and the Crimson Bands of Sidorak. Manipulation, Mirror Dimension, Portal Generation and Astral Projection. Elemental Spells, Flames of the Faltine, Icy Tendrils of Ichthalon and Winds of Watum. B. The New Binding Vow. By partially summoning New, Ethan gains a 10x multiplier to his attributes and can toggle his electrical cursed energy trait. Maximum output, attacks reaching 1 billion volts. Constraint, Ethan rarely uses this in public, as the ambient discharge is lethal to non-sorcerers. See Chimeras. Chimera Reiju can share sight with Ethan, unleashes high-speed electrical attacks in large numbers. Mahagajas, Max Elephant fused with New's wings. Rykos, Round Deer fused with New's wings. Samsara, Maharaga, Round Deer and Rabbit Escape fusion, capable of healing incurable illness. Binding Vow, Reiju strike a suicidal pact where Reiju sacrifice their lives to bypass energy limits, delivering a strike capable of one-shotting standard special grade spirits. D. Maharaga, the ultimate adaptation. Ethan has reached parity with the Divine General, achieving functional immortality. Adaptations, Mirror Dimension, Sling Ring Portals, Maharaga now cuts space with the Sword of Extermination, Chaos Magic and all spells in Tora's arsenal. Soul/Physical, adapted to soul-based attacks, extreme temperatures, physical trauma and nuclear radiation. The 80% restriction vow, Ethan limits his CE output to 80% during the analysis phase of a phenomenon to increase Maharaga's adaptation speed threefold. Once adapted, output surges back to 100%. V. Curse Tools, Shikigami Imbuement. Binding Vow, Ethan exchanges the summoning of a Shikigami for a cursed tool. The lockout period for the shadow is proportional to the duration the tool is used. A. Hattie and Skull, dual sentient swords imbued with the Divine Dogs. B. Spear and Shield, imbued with New, the spear discharges 1 billion volts, while the shield can survive anything short of a nuclear impact. C. The Great Bow, utilizes infinite chains, Rabbit Escape for endless reach. D. Hiration, specialized teleportation kunai. E. Momentum Arrow, imbued with Piercing Ox for unstoppable force. F. RCT Discs, imbued with Round Deer for remote healing. G. Soulstrike Whip, imbued with Toad for soul-targeting attacks. H. The Segment, a 3-section staff imbued with Max Elephant. I. Black Flash Gauntlets, Zenith Tier Tools imbued with Tora. J. The 8-handled Wheel, the manifestation of Maharaga's essence. 6. RCT, 10 Shadows Reversal. Divine Dogs Reversal, 5-tailed Kitsune Special Grade, focuses on high-level genjutsu, illusions. New Reversal, Earthworm Jorman Special Grade, grants Earth/Dust Release. Great Serpent Reversal, Verdant Dragon Ryujin Special Grade, grants Wood Release. Max Elephant Reversal, Phoenix Suzaku Special Grade, grants Fire/Heat Manipulation. Rabbit Escape Reversal, Aegis Tortoise Special Grade, functions as a building-sized Uchiha fan that absorbs and reflects attacks. Piercing Ox Reversal, Gravity Sheep Ares Special Grade, manipulates gravity wells and anti-gravity. Toad Reversal, Corrosive Widow Grade 1, can liquefy into a universal solvent. Round Deer Reversal, Swarm Moth Psyche Special Grade Collective, Psychic/Mental Disruption. Tiger Funeral Reversal, P Special Grade, utilizes Cursed Spirit Manipulation. Maharaga Reversal, Abaddon Unclassified, can only be summoned against worthy opponents. 7. Advanced RCT Applications. Phoenix Binding Vows. Vow 1 cannot be fully summoned. In exchange, thermal output hits 50,000 degrees Celsius. Vow 2. Partial summoning is restricted to single targets. In exchange, heat reaches 65,000 degrees Celsius, turning all matter in a 200 m radius into volatile fuel for a detonation. Chimera Piercing Ares, a fusion of the ox and the gravity sheep. Infinite Momentum Arrow, a cursed tool capable of maintaining velocity in zero gravity. Hollow Trace, developed by Ethan and Tora after witnessing the masking effects of the ancient boat artifact, it was a mobile seal that suppressed his cursed energy signature to zero. Boogie Woogie, self-explanatory. Chapter 46, Absolute Point. Within the depths of the dungeons of Asgard, a lone dark elf activated a curse stone to initiate his grim transformation. The Dark Elves created the Curse Warriors by utilizing curse stones, which were magical, crimson, grenade-like objects. By crushing such a stone, a dark elf like Algrim consumed the latent energy, triggering a metamorphosis that drastically increased their physical size, raw strength, and durability. These stones are forged from the ether, the reality stone, providing immense power at the ultimate cost of the one's life. Curse has fully manifested in the flesh and broken through the confines of his own prison cell. He proceeded to slaughter the Einherjar guards by siphoning their life force directly, and then released all the other prisoners to create a chaotic distraction. Thor arrived shortly after to contain the violent outbreak and was eventually successful. Meanwhile, the Dark Elves have successfully infiltrated the kingdom of Asgard using their cloaked ships. Their primary objective was to seize what was hidden within Jane Foster, the Ether. Malekith himself had arrived to seize Jane Foster, but Queen Frigga intervened, nearly ending the Dark Elf's life. However, Curse arrived just in time to save his master. Though Frigga had successfully protected Jane by casting an illusion so perfect that even Malekith was completely fooled, the effort ultimately cost her her life. The encounter resulted in her tragic death at the hands of Curse. When Thor arrived a mere moment later and witnessed the fallen queen, he hurled Mjolnir with all his righteous fury toward the invaders. Curse stepped forward to take the brunt of the attack. Though the hammer failed to kill them, the lightning's discharge was powerful enough to severely burn the side of Malekith's face. With Odin now cradling his dead wife in silent grief, Thor remembered what had occurred with Son of Cowl. When the agent had died, he had been brought back from beyond by Ethan Park. There was a way to save her yet, Thor realized. Without elaborating further to the mourning All-Father, Thor started spinning his hammer and took to the stormy sky. He arrived in his royal chambers a minute later and retrieved the ornate wooden box Ethan had given him. Inside it rested the kunai. When Ethan materialized within the grand hall of the Asgardian royal castle, he found Thor standing alone, his eyes visibly moist with unshed tears. Ethan immediately spread his senses. He could perceive the presence of many fallen warriors throughout the palace. The aftermath of the invasion? He thought grimly. Does that mean? Where is she? Ethan asked directly, wasting no time on pleasantries. If there was a chance he could save the queen, he was determined to take it. Thor looked taken aback for a moment. How did you? This way. He quickly shook off his surprise, focusing entirely on what mattered most. They arrived at the scene where Odin was still clinging desperately to his wife's cooling form. Father. Thor spoke softly as he pried his father away from her body. Odin looked toward his son and then at Ethan, the grief etched into the lines of his aged face. Ethan is here. He can help. He brought back a mortal from the very grasp of death. He can bring back Mother, Thor said, his eyes still damp even as a hopeful smile touched his lips. Every case is unique, my friend. Do not give him hope just yet, Ethan added immediately, his eyes downcast as he assessed the situation. Tora manifested from Ethan's shadow, standing 8 feet tall. With a silent command, the shadow transmuted a large round table in the center of the room to serve as a makeshift surgical platform, and levitated Queen Mother's body and placed it on the platform all in a single motion. Shortly after Jane arrived, she gasped at the sight of Queen Frigga's body and moved to Thor's side. Ethan prepared to perform a high level of reverse curse technique, RCT, on the All-Mother. Partially summoning Chimera Samsara, he incanted. The Wheel of Harmony materialized above his head. He usually kept this wheel concealed within his shadow when in public, as it functioned exactly the same way in his shadow. Odin was looking at the wheel above his head with an unreadable expression. Ethan began outputting massive amounts of RCT through Frigga's wound, within a few minutes, sealing the external lacerations and mending any internal damage the cursed blade might have caused. Click! The wheel spun once. And Ethan felt it, a resistance he hadn't encountered when he revived Agent Coulson. The realization struck him a second later. This was an absolute point. He looked towards Thor hopeful eyes and back at his hands again. Maharaga could adapt to this resistance. In around a dozen rotation, Ethan concluded. Ancient One had explained years ago that an absolute point is a fixed, immutable event in time that cannot be altered, even with the time stone, without risking the destruction of the universe. Ethan hadn't argued with her then. After all, he had seen it with his own eyes in the What If series in his previous life. Strange Supreme had destroyed his entire reality by breaking an absolute point, using immense dark magic to resurrect Christine Palmer. I can do something similar using Maharaga's adaptation, Ethan realized. That is why she warned me. She must have seen this exact moment in the future. He closed his eyes shut tight and ceased the output of reverse cursed technique. When he opened them again, he looked toward Thor and noticed that more people had arrived while he was performing RCT. The Warriors 3 and Lady Sif were now standing within the hall as well. I am sorry, Thor. I can't heal her, Ethan added solemnly. He knew he could not choose one single life over the safety of the entire universe. What do you mean you can't? It was the All-Father who spoke next. His voice boomed through the chamber as he swung Gungnir toward Ethan's neck in a flash of gold. Ethan caught the length of the spear, matching the All-Father's strength and stopping the tip mere inches from his throat. There is no killing intent behind this attack. Just a grief-driven reaction, Ethan analyzed, holding his ground as he locked eyes with Odin. I will let this one slide. Father, no. Stop this. Thor quickly jumped in, moving to intervene between the two. Odin let go of the spear and rushed back toward his wife, caressing her face as he sobbed openly. Thor turned back toward Ethan, his expression a mix of confusion and mounting dread, and asked, What happened? Your mother's death is an absolute point in time. Changing it forcefully could unmake the universe as we know it, Ethan added softly, his voice carrying the weight of a heavy truth. Thor looked at him a long moment before asking, Isn't there another way? Ethan shook his head and said, I am afraid not. Thor turned and stormed out of the room, the Warriors 3 and Lady Sif following close behind him in a silent, grim procession. Jane remained behind. She looked toward Ethan, then at Thor, and followed soon after. Jane Foster knew that in the wake of the Battle of New York, Ethan's face became a global phenomenon. He was recognized worldwide not as a combatant, but as a miracle worker capable of healing illnesses or injuries that current medical technology couldn't touch. Few had witnessed him in the heat of battle, and fewer still had seen his frontline Shikigami in action. To the public, he was defined by his rabbits and deers. It was only in the quiet, grim aftermath of the invasion that his identity solidified in the collective consciousness as a healer. However, the stories didn't stop there. After May 4th, an influx of people from every corner of the globe came forward, claiming to have been saved by him. Though S.H.I.E.L.D. has kept the resurrection of Agent Coulson under wraps, there was no containing the other miracles. Ethan turned to leave, casting one last lingering look toward Queen Frigga's body before stepping out of the room. Once outside, Ethan focused on his shadow. Hundreds of Chimera Samsara manifested, scurrying toward the Asgardian soldiers who lay near death in the wake of the Dark Elf invasion. Later that day, Asgard held a massive funeral ceremony for those fallen in the invasion. While Ethan had saved many soldiers on the brink of death, none were like Agent Coulson. None had been brought back from the beyond. Ethan had been present during the ceremony. Sif had informed him that Thor himself had insisted that he be there. Though the number of fallen had been reduced significantly, the casualties still numbered in the hundreds. As Ethan watched the final funeral boats drift across the great waterfall, he looked toward Thor, who motioned for him to follow. His friends and Jane followed suit, trailing behind the god of thunder. Shortly after, they arrived in one of the palace's private drawing rooms. Volstagg and Fandral immediately reached for the wine decanters, while Thor sat at the far end of the room, arms crossed, with Mjolnir resting at his side. Ethan approached him. Today, we would be sending many more boats through that waterfall if not for you. Not just I, but the whole of Asgard is grateful, Thor said, pressing his hands together in a gesture of profound respect. I am sorry about your mother, Ethan added quietly. No, her safety was her own to decide, not mine or yours. She could have hidden herself, yet she chose to fight that wretched Malekith, Thor answered with pride, as the low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. She resides in the halls of Valhalla now, as do they all. Volstag's voice boomed as he raised his cup in a solemn toast. What is our next move? Lady Sif asked, her eyes sharp. Thor stood up and walked toward Ethan. I know I am being shameless, he began, but Ethan raised a hand to silence him. This Malekith sounds like someone who will not be satisfied with Asgard alone. He will come for Earth eventually. I am simply snipping a thread in the bud, Ethan stated. Actually, Malekith intends to bring about eternal night using the ether, Fandral added. At least that is what the legends say. He will undoubtedly target Midgard. Jane Foster watched the exchange with mounting dread. Does that mean there will be another alien invasion? Ethan moved toward where Thor was previously sitting, his back turned to the group. What are we waiting for then? Let's go kill this bastard. He turned sharply, extending Mjolnir toward Thor. The room fell into a deafening silence. Until Volstagg burped loudly. Chapter 47, Ether. There is still the issue of the ether, Thor added, accepting his hammer. He looked toward Jane with a deeply worried expression, his brow furrowed with concern. Ethan followed his gaze, his mind racing with meta-knowledge regarding the infamous liquid. He recalled that Malekith eventually extracted the ether from Jane Foster on Svartalfheim by utilizing his inherent, supernatural connection to the substance, literally drawing the sludge out of her body and into himself. He also remembered how Rocket will employ a specialized ether extractor to safely remove the stone from her body. That device, Ethan assumed, had been built by the raccoon himself, who stood among the smartest characters in the entirety of the MCU. Ethan possessed neither the connection to the ether required for the first method nor the technological expertise to construct a device for the second. Therefore, he turned to the one thing he did have, jujitsu. Maximum technique, Chimera Max Samsara. Similar to his standard Chimera Samsara, this version possessed an exponential increase in potency. Ethan rarely deployed it, as the base Samsara was usually more than sufficient for his needs. Max Samsara was a specialized fusion of only the round deer and Maharaga. Its appearance was that of a majestic 9-foot-tall deer when standing on all four legs, with the iconic Maharaga wheel hovering silently above its head. Upon the sudden manifestation of the titanic creature within the room, every member of the group reflexively stood up, their eyes wide with caution and awe. Ethan placed a hand on the chimera's muzzle, gently caressing it. He turned his gaze toward Jane and spoke. This beauty will help us extract that thing inside you. Though we will still need some device to hold the damn liquid, he added, looking directly at Thor as he finished his sentence. The ether, as far as I know, is sentient. It will attempt to attach itself to the nearest living host the moment it is freed from Miss Foster, seeking to leech off their life force, Ethan explained. Tora spoke as he manifested in the room. I might be able to help with that, he said, transmuting a lantern-like container forged of destroyer metal enchanted by all kinds of containment spell. Ethan examined it for a second and handed it back to Tora with a reproving look. It was always better when his Shikigamis took initiative. Now the room contained a giant deer and a bipedal tiger. Ethan gave a subtle nod and Max Samsara moved toward Jane and bathed the room in a dense, white RCT glow. The wheel above its head spun once. Click. The RCT treated the ether as a foreign substance and started purging it from Jane. The ether began flowing out of Jane's body, where Tora stood waiting, guiding the fluid into the device. After a grueling few minutes, the glow of the RCT subsided, and the ether was finally extracted. Ethan desummoned Max Samsara, though the wheel of harmony materialized above Ethan's own head and made a rotation. Click. 6 more rotations remained until the Divine General adapted to the ether, the reality stone. As the ether left her body, Jane collapsed. Thor rushed toward her as Ethan retrieved an RCT disc from his shadow, placed it above her body, and activated it. She will be all right, she's just exhausted from the extraction process, Ethan said, his voice steady as he monitored Jane's recovery. Thor gave a grateful nod and turned to face the rest of the group, his expression hardening. What I am about to ask of you is treason of the highest order. Malekith knew the ether was here, he could sense its power, and that is what drew him toward Asgard. We must move the ether off-world immediately, he added. gesturing toward the containment lantern. Thor stood up, pacing with a restless energy. We still need a way to Svartalfheim. My father has forbidden me from launching a counterattack. He sits planning in his war council, clouded by grief. But we must strike back when they least expect it. The Bifrost has been shut down and the Tesseract is locked away in the vaults, Lady Sif added, highlighting the impossibility of their situation. Every eye turned toward Ethan for a solution. After all, he was known to teleport at will through the shadows. Yeah. I can't go to places I haven't marked or don't have a clear sensory idea of. I can't help you there, Ethan said, raising both hands in a defensive gesture. While a sling ring portal can technically be opened to places a sorcerer has never physically visited, it is significantly more difficult, requiring intense and precise mental visualization of the destination. Although Ethan possessed a visual of Svartalfheim from his memories of the movie, the fragmented images that he could share with Tora weren't enough to secure a stable gateway. There are paths between worlds known only to a few. Fandral noted, his voice dropping to a whisper. Only one, actually, Thor corrected. No, Volstagg replied grimly, the realization of who Thor was referring to hitting him. The group went silent as they all turned toward Thor. They couldn't utilize the Bifrost or the Tesseract, Odin had strictly forbidden it, and there was only one person left available who knew the secret shadow paths between the worlds. Loki. Later that day. This is so unlike you, brother, Loki remarked, pacing alongside Thor. So clandestine. Are you quite sure you wouldn't rather just punch your way out? If you keep speaking, I just might, Thor replied. Fine, as you wish. I am not even here, Loki said, shimmering as he morphed his appearance into that of a standard Einherjar soldier. Is this better? It is better company at the very least, Thor replied dryly. Still, we could be less conspicuous, Loki countered. He shifted back before transmuting Thor into the likeness of Lady Sif. Brother, you look ravishing. It will hurt no less when I kill you in this form, Thor warned after a brief, disgruntled examination of his current state. Very well. Perhaps you prefer one of your new companions, given that you seem to like them so much. Loki mused. In a flash of green light, he transmuted into Captain Rogers. Oh, this is much better. So tight. The confidence. I can feel the righteousness surging. Hey, wanna have a rousing discussion about truth, honor, and patriotism? God bless Amber. Loki didn't get to finish as Thor clamped a hand over his mouth and dragged him into a dark corner, spotting a squad of Einherjar soldiers patrolling the immediate area. There Loki had asked for his daggers back. He received a pair of handcuffs in return. 15 minutes later, the group consisting of Ethan, the Warriors 3, Lady Sif and Heimdall, whom Thor had convinced to delay reporting them until they had escaped, waited expectantly as Loki and Thor entered through the main doors. Loki froze the moment he spotted the sorcerer. You didn't mention we had company from Midgard, he exclaimed, his voice laced with annoyance. No, I didn't. Heh. I thought you liked tricks, Thor replied, offering a broad, satisfied smile at his brother's misfortune. Loki stepped toward Ethan. So we meet again. That we do, Ethan replied, without so much as glancing up from his mobile screen. Ethan was currently focused on his smartphone, which functioned as a tactical interface. He had developed a method similar to that of Mei or Kenjaku, allowing him to broadcast and share the vision of his Shikigami. Right now, a Chimera Reiju was soaring near the dark ridge mountains east of the Bifrost, feeding a live aerial view directly to his palm. Ethan cleared his throat and handed Loki the Stark phone. Where exactly is the origin of the shadow path? Loki looked bewildered, staring at the high-definition display. This is shared vision in real time, is it? Upon receiving a nod from Ethan, he pointed at a specific, unassuming rocky cave. There, though we will need one of the ships to cross the chasm. Don't worry about the ride, Ethan said, glancing toward Thor. There was no longer any need to steal the Dark Elf's ship from where it had crashed in the Asgardian main hall. Ethan commanded his Reiju to descend upon the specified coordinates. He then retrieved a Hiratian kunai from his shadow. He held it for a brief second before the blade flickered out of existence. Using shadow manipulation, he teleported the marker directly to his Shikigami's location. You all ready? Ethan asked. The Warriors 3 gripped their weapons a little tighter, while Loki remained sullenly bound in his handcuffs. Heimdall stepped away from the group, tasked with staying behind to inform the All-Father of their departure once they were clear. Ethan placed his hands firmly on Sif and Thor's shoulders. They, in turn, reached out to the others until the group formed a loose circle. With a final collective nod, the world blurred. A heartbeat later, they were teleported directly to the mouth of the cave leading to the shadow path. As the group materialized, the sudden pressure change caused by the wind buffeted them, snapping their capes and furs like whips. Loki looked around at the desolate ridge and asked, "Where is our ride?" Ethan simply smiled and replied, "Behind you," as the building-sized form of the verdant dragon Shikigami manifested from the gloom. Ethan had summoned Ryujin, the reversal of the Great Serpent, as it possessed the capability to fly at subsonic speeds. He pivoted on his feet, jumped, and landed squarely atop the dragon's head. The warriors 3 and Lady Sif wasted no time, making their way along the dragon's neck to find their footing. Ryujin turned its massive gaze toward Loki and let out a guttural sound of disapproval. "I don't think he wants me to ride him," Loki suggested dryly. "And where exactly am I meant to hold on? There are no scales to grasp." "Quit whining," Thor grunted, clasping his brother firmly before taking to the sky and landing safely on Ryujin's back. And so they made their way to Svartalfheim. When they finally arrived, the sight shocked them. They had come expecting a battalion or a large company of soldiers, but what they found was a true army. Roughly 100 ships were docked, surrounded by tens of thousands of foot soldiers spanning the dark plains. Odin's beard. "It's an army." Volstagg gasped. "Thanks for the commentary, genius," Fandral retorted, his hand tight on his sword hilt. "What do we do?" "Report back," Lady Sif suggested, her eyes scanning the overwhelming odds. "Report back? We don't have time for that," Loki countered. He pointed toward Ethan and added, "Just let him loose on them and this facade will be over." "I can't believe I am saying this, but Loki is right," Thor spoke next. "We don't have time to return. The convergence will happen any minute. If even a small portion of this army is transported to an undefended region across the 9 realms, they will lay waste to anything in their path." Ethan stood up, retrieving a longbow and a single arrow from his shadow. "So it's decided then?" He notched the arrow and took a general aim toward the sea of enemies below. His party looked surprised, but before they could stop him from prematurely revealing their position, he launched the projectile. A visible thunderclap echoed as Ethan released the string. They all tracked the arrow's trajectory, their eyes widening as the single shaft transformed into tens of thousands, multiplying until they effectively blotted out the sky. This was a cursed tool imbued by his chimera, piercing rabbits, a fusion of rabbit escape and the piercing ox. Much like the chain of 1,000 miles, this tool utilized a specialized recursive property. While the arrow possessed less piercing power than his standard momentum arrow, it was more than sufficient for the task. When the barrage landed, it obliterated the enemy's front line. Even 10 ships caught in the initial spray were shredded by the sheer volume of the projectiles, all from a single devastating attack. "I told you so," Loki remarked, an involuntary shiver running down his spine. Chapter 48, The Battle of Svartalfheim, Part 1. When the barrage ended, Tora fully emerged from Ethan's shadow, flanking him. Ethan gave his party a sharp nod, then scanned the desolate horizon of Svartalfheim before turning toward Thor. "There is no civilian population here," he noted, his voice flat. "Yes, Malekith slaughtered all who opposed him. Svartalfheim was the first world his army consumed," Thor added grimly, his grip tightening on Mjolnir. "Good, then I won't feel a shred of guilt for what I am about to do to them," Ethan replied with a sly smile. In a sudden burst of cursed energy, Nu's wings erupted from his back, and he took to the sky, soaring toward the main body of the enemy host. Thor began spinning his hammer, preparing to follow the sorcerer into the fray, but Tora interjected. "Ethan is about to deploy his most devastating technique. It will hinder him if you are in the vicinity, Odinson," the Shikigami warned, as multiple eldritch circles materialized around his right hand. "What was the previous attack then?" "A warning shot," Volstagg mumbled sarcastically, his grip tightening on his axe. Tora ignored him, extending his arm to manifest a massive dome of mystic force, the shield of the Seraphim, which he immediately layered beneath the crystalline folds of the mirror dimension. Through the geometric distortions of the dimensions, the group watched Ethan's distant silhouette hang suspended against the gloom of the sky. Ethan clasped his hands into a sovereign seal. Loki, recognizing the ritualistic gesture from their previous encounter, whispered a breathless realization. Oh no! Domain expansion, Chimera Sovereign Garden. Ethan deployed a complete, 200-meter radius domain. The shadows of Svartalfheim rose, swallowing the gray plains. Open fire! A dark elf commander shrieked in his native tongue, pointing toward the silhouette in the sky, but his soldiers found no footing. The ground beneath them had transformed into a bottomless, viscous sea of shadow. Stay in formation! The commander shouted over the rising chaos, but his command died in his throat as his soldiers began sinking into the ground. Something has my leg. Help! A soldier's plea was cut short as he was dragged under, the shadow surface sealing over him as if he had never existed. Fire at will. Just fire everything. The Dark Elves unleashed a desperate barrage of black hole grenades and energy bolts, but the projectiles simply sank into the darkness or were intercepted by a swarm of moth psyche that descended like a suffocating cloud. Amidst the slaughter, the commander noticed Ethan remained perfectly still. He's not moving. Why isn't he moving? Partial summoning Suzaku. The temperature around Ethan skyrocketed instantly. 5,000 degrees Celsius. 10,000 degrees Celsius. Everything within his immediate vicinity turned a violent, blinding orange. At 20,000 degrees Celsius, the commander and the nearby platoons didn't even have time to scream before they spontaneously combusted where they stood. Ethan looked toward the armada of ships and pressed his hands together. The heat doubled to 40,000 degrees Celsius, turning the sky a bruised, dark red. Tens of ships vanished in chain reaction explosions, their armored hulls turning white-hot and liquid. Even the shadow-slicked ground began to churn like molten lava. Finally, the temperature reached its peak, 65,000 degrees Celsius, approximately 13 times hotter than the surface of the sun. But that was only the beginning. Under a second binding vow involving his phoenix Shikigami, every piece of inanimate matter within the 200-meter radius of his domain, armor, weapons, debris, transformed into volatile fuel for a localized detonation. Ethan took aim with a makeshift bow composed of compressed plasma and launched an arrow at the largest ship in the vicinity. The arrow flew true and the world vanished in white. Boom! 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 A series of catastrophic detonations rippled through the valley. With every enemy ship and weapon converted into fuel, a pillar of fire erupted, surging high enough to pierce the stratosphere and illuminating the dead world of Svartalfheim like a newborn star. If one possessed an exceptionally keen eye, they could just make out the silhouette of Ethan Park, head bowed in a moment of focus amidst the carnage he had wrought. Half a mile away, encased within the dual protection of the mirror dimension and the shield of the Seraphim, the Asgardians stood speechless. These were warriors who had spent centuries warring against frost giants, rock trolls, and cosmic horrors, yet they found themselves paralyzed by the display. So that happened, Loki remarked, finally breaking the heavy silence. His voice was punctuated by a heavy thud as Volstag's axe slipped from his numb fingers and hit the ground. Ha 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 ha. I don't think the Dark Elves will be a problem any longer. Volstag's boisterous voice eventually boomed, though it carried a hint of hysterical relief. Ethan claims only a few beings in the universe could withstand that attack and live to tell the tale. He counts you among them, Odinson, Tora added, a small, knowing smile playing on the Tiger Shikigami's features. Thor didn't return the smile. He simply stared at the glassified horizon and gave a slow, solemn nod. Yeah, I could definitely take that, he muttered, though his grip on Mjolnir suggested he wasn't eager to test the theory. Beside him, Loki was subtly shaking his head with a look of pure incredulity, as if silently screaming no, no you definitely cannot. Ethan's belief that Thor could survive this attack stemmed from his meta-knowledge. He knew a post-awakened god of thunder would eventually endure the full concentrated blast of a neutron star. That feat required weathering temperatures exceeding 50,000 degrees Celsius, the baseline thermal energy required to melt URU metal. It was this extreme melting point that necessitated forging the Stormbreaker in the heart of dying star. Though that didn't mean Thor can walk out unharmed. A full 10 minutes passed before the towering inferno finally subsided into a low, malevolent glow. Ethan was seen walking calmly out of the center of the molten crater. As he reached the jagged edge, his form flickered and vanished, reappearing instantly within the safety of the dome. He had used Tora as a physical conduit, bridging the distance through shadow manipulation. Just then another ship appeared, emerging from a spatial rift torn open by the encroaching convergence. High above the smoldering wasteland, the vessel deactivated its cloaking field and descended. It landed with a thud in the center of the glassified crater. From its boarding ramp, Malekith, Curse, and a final platoon of elite soldiers made their presence known. Malekith stood frozen, his gaze sweeping over the carnage that had once been his grand host. "My army?" "No," he growled, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Curse wordlessly pointed toward a distant ridge, where the silhouette of 8 figures stood against the darkening sky. Ethan had signaled Tora to drop both the mirror dimension and the shield of the seraphim the moment the enemy vessel revealed itself. Ethan reached into his shadow, beginning to retrieve his longbow and another piercing rabbit arrow to wipe out the remnants of the dark elves. However, Thor's hand moved firmly to stop him. "No," Thor said, his voice dropping to a thunderous register as he looked directly at Park. "They invaded Asgard. They slaughtered our people, desecrated our home, and murdered my mother. This ends with me." Ethan paused, observing the incandescent fury radiating from the Prince of Asgard. Malekith doesn't even have the ether in his possession, Ethan thought. Even if he did, Thor wouldn't lose today. A faint smile touched Ethan's lips. This wasn't just a moment for Thor's vengeance, it was the perfect opportunity to deploy a specific high-level fusion he had been refining. "Fine. It's your fight. I'll act as support," Ethan replied. "Tora here." Ethan handed the bow and arrow to his Shikigami. Tora accepted the gear with a respectful nod and sank into the depths of the shadows, taking the weapons with him. Ethan then clasped his hands, his cursed energy twisting into a complex, multi-layered resonance. Merged beast, Agito. This was the same monstrosity famously summoned by Sukuna, sharing the same one-shot kill condition as Maharaga, as it would instantly regenerate from any damage that didn't vaporize it entirely. Not only could it heal itself, but it could project its reverse curse technique to Ethan and his allies. Agito was the ultimate support class Shikigami. Ethan had formed this chimera by merging the following. New, granting it high-voltage electrical discharge and formidable defensive stats. Great Serpent. Unlike the original Agito, Ethan's serpent was not destroyed, it functioned as a powerful, autonomous striking tail. Round Deer, providing the core RCT engine to heal the beast and the party. Tiger Funeral, the centerpiece. This addition granted the Chimera Tora's intelligence and his profound mastery over the mystic arts. From across the scorched crater, Malekith's voice tore through the air. "Was this your doing, Asgardian?" "Ha ha ha. Yes. Yes it was." Volstagg roared back, puffing out his chest. The rest of the party turned to him with pointed, incredulous looks. That was clearly not done by an Asgardian. "He doesn't need to know that," Volstagg whispered to them under his breath, his gaze then shifting toward the massive, imposing form of Agito. "I am not even going to ask," he muttered, turning back toward Ethan, who remained focused on the approaching battalion. Malekith glared at the group, his mind racing. They must have used a weapon of mass destruction not from the dawn of time, something Bor never possessed, he theorized. But they did not fire it again when my ship arrived. That implies a recharge period, or a massive cost. I will kill them before they can strike again. "Kill the one with the hammer first," Malekith commanded Curse, his eyes cold. He is grandson of Bor. And so the final skirmish began, Malekith, Curse and 100 Dark Elf elites against 6 Asgardians, Ethan Park, and merged beast Agito. Chapter 49, The Battle of Svartalfheim, Part 2. Thor charged forth, hurling Mjolnir at the advancing front. The hammer struck the first line of enemies, disintegrating them instantly upon impact and unleashing a massive area of effect electrical discharge as a secondary shockwave. From the chaos of the enemy lines, Curse charged, closing the distance into Thor's personal space with terrifying speed. He backhanded the God of Thunder, launching Thor like a bullet toward a nearby cliff. Swish! However, the moment Thor's body reached the point of impact, he found himself standing safely beside Ethan, while it was Curse who slammed into the jagged rock face. Thor was naturally bewildered by the sudden spatial displacement. He looked toward Ethan, only to receive a knowing side eye and a slight smile. Ethan had activated his unique version of Boogie Woogie on Thor and Curse. On, Ethan thought, and his distinct cursed energy trait flared to life, purple lightning dancing across his skin. "Thor, I don't have time to explain my technique right now." Just trust me, okay? Ethan said, noting Thor's shock. He reached out and touched Mjolnir, imbuing it with piercing ox. The hammer's hue flickered briefly before reverting to its original state. The only lasting change was the handle, which had shifted from its usual leather brown to a deep obsidian black. Throw your hammer to your left with all your strength, and don't call it back, Ethan commanded. Though confused, Thor obeyed. As the hammer left his hand, Agito opened up 2 sling ring portals directly in its path, interconnected with each other. In the film Thor, the Dark World, Mjolnir is seen traversing Earth's atmosphere in seconds. It acts as a hyperfast projectile, reaching estimated speeds of Mach 200 to 400. In the comics, it has even reached FTL, faster than light speeds during interstellar travel. Now, Ethan had coupled that velocity with the linear, unstoppable momentum of the piercing ox. Curse emerged from the shattered cliffside undeterred and began his march toward them once more. However, his advance was short-lived as another sling ring portal tore open directly in his path. Mjolnir, now imbued with the unstoppable momentum of piercing ox, shrieked toward him. The impact was instantaneous. Curse attempted to deflect the projectile with his bare hands, only to find himself a hand short for his trouble. The hammer sheared through his limb like a hot wire through butter. Mjolnir whistled past him, but before it could fly off into the distance, another portal opened in its trajectory, diverting it to strike from Curse's blind right side. This second impact was catastrophic. The sheer, accumulated momentum of the hammer obliterated Curse's upper torso, reducing the monstrous warrior once feared across the 9 realms to a mess of crushed armor and dark matter. Thor summoned Mjolnir back to his hand, glancing at the weapon with a strange, puzzled expression. You get used to it after a while, Ethan noted dryly. They scanned the battlefield together, surveying the ruin of the Dark Elf forces. The tide had turned decisively. Lady Sif was calmly wiping the dark ichor from her blade, while the warriors 3 moved with grim efficiency to finish off the stragglers. Even Loki, whose hands had been surreptitiously freed in the chaos, had accounted for an entire squad of dark elves himself. Malekith remained positioned safely behind his front lines, shielded by a dwindling wall of elite soldiers. Sensing that the currents of battle had shifted against him, he hissed an order for a frantic retreat. He commanded half the remaining battalion to hold the line as a sacrificial wall while he made a desperate dash for his ship. However, his escape was short-lived. Agito manifested instantly from Malekith's own shadow, towering over him like a vengeful deity. The chimera lunged, struck the ancient warlord with a punch wreathed in high-voltage electrical cursed energy, and in the same fluid motion, swept its great serpent tail across the surrounding battalion, shattering their formation and life alike. Malekith was defeated. However, something unusual happened. Suddenly, a lone dark elf soldier, the sole survivor of the squad Loki had just dispatched, lunged forward from the dirt. Before anyone could react, he drove his blade deep through Loki's torso. The battlefield fell into a deafening silence. It lasted only a heartbeat before Thor's roar of anguish tore through the air. He launched Mjolnir with a violent snap of his wrist, crushing the soldier into the earth on impact. But the damage was already done. Loki collapsed, gasping for breath as he lay dying on the cold ground. Thor scrambled toward him, crouching beside his brother with trembling hands. No, 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 no. You fool, you didn't listen. Thor choked out, his voice thick with grief. I know. I am a fool. I am a fool, Loki rasped, his eyes fluttering as his life force seemed to slip away. The warriors 3 and Ethan approached the scene, their expressions grim. Thor looked up, his face a mask of desperation. Stay with me. Ethan! Ethan, help him! He screamed at the top of his lungs, his eyes pleading. Loki's hand clutched Thor's arm weakly. No, brother, my time has come. I am sorry. I am so sorry. As the final apology left his lips, the color drained from his face, turning a sickly, stone-cold gray. His eyes went glassy and the god of mischief was dead. Ethan stepped forward, his pace steady and unhurried. He didn't look panicked, instead he let out a long, audible sigh. The Asgardians looked at him incredulously. Was he truly mocking Loki's death? I'm sorry, Thor, Ethan spoke as a lone rabbit manifested from his shadow. He plucked the creature up by its torso. But I can't exactly revive someone who isn't actually dead. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the rabbit towards a seemingly empty patch of air several feet away. A second later, the Shikigami collided with something physical. The impact shattered the illusion. The dead Loki vanished in a flare of green light, revealing the mangled corpse of a dark elf soldier in its place. Meanwhile, the real Loki shimmered into view, wearing his classic mischievous smirk as he raised his hands in a mock gesture of surrender. "Loki!" Thor bellowed, his grief instantly replaced by a vein-popping fury. "It was worth a try," Loki mumbled, completely unapologetic. With the threat neutralized, Agito opened a sling ring portal, the orange sparks contrasting against the dark skies of Svartalfheim. They made their way back to Asgard with 2 prisoners in tow, Loki and Malekith. It would be Odin who passed final judgment on the ancient warlord. Given the All-Father's state of mind following the death of his queen, Ethan assumed the chances of Malekith surviving the week, let alone the dungeons, were non-existent. Chapter 50, Talk with Odin, Part 1. Ethan and the Warriors 3 stood in the throne room of the Asgardian royal palace. The royal court had adjourned moments ago. With Malekith reduced to charred meat in the middle of the room by a concentrated blast of the Odin force, and Loki locked away in the dungeons for the foreseeable future, the realm was still reeling from the dark elf invasion that had ravaged them just days prior. One thing Ethan noted was the behavior of the common folk toward Thor. They seemed to almost revere him, the prince who not only lost his mother but also defeated the villain and his army before more harm could be wrought. Truly a hero's tale. Ethan looked toward Thor, who stood near the throne, staring at the charred remains of Malekith. He hadn't expected his father to execute him in such a fashion. Death was not out of the question, but the manner of it disturbed him. It was a side of his father he had never truly seen. After all, it was dishonorable to kill a man while restrained. Jane stood beside him. She had recovered enough from the ether extraction process to attend the proceedings, though the way her body shook betrayed that she had not expected an execution. Ethan and Thor locked eyes for a moment across the hall. Ethan gave a slight nod and motioned toward his back where Jane stood. Thor moved toward her, immediately engulfing her in a hug, casting one last look at Malekith's remains and then toward his father. Odin was already stirring. "The court is adjourned," he announced before promptly leaving the throne room. As Ethan prepared to leave and find Thor, one of the Einherjar guards approached him. "The All-Father would have a word with you." "This way," he spoke in a no-nonsense voice. Ethan raised an eyebrow, but the guard was already moving, so he followed. Soon they arrived at what appeared to be a small but classic library, intended more for personal use. Odin could be seen standing there in his armor, Gungnir held firm in his right arm, while he flipped through the pages of a book. "Do you have kids, sorcerer?" Odin asked suddenly. "No," Ethan spoke after a pause. "I am not that blessed. Or cursed. When I'm king, I'll hunt the monsters down and slay them all, just as you did, father. Thor said those words to me when he was but a child," Odin stated, not even looking up from the book. Ethan looked around the room. To their left was furniture made of aged wood, lined with books. The room itself was like standing in a gold mine, everything was plated in or colored like the precious metal. The Einherjar who brought him there had already left. He made to speak, but the All-Father continued. "How do you tell a child that the monsters they have been taught to slay their whole life is their own father?" Odin spoke, looking directly at him, and nudged his neck to tell Ethan to move toward the balcony. "The crimes for which I punished Loki are nothing compared to the atrocities I committed in my young days, but you already knew that, didn't you? You are her ward after all," Odin added, as they made their way to the open balcony. The entirety of the Asgardian capital city was visible, and there were chairs made of gold and fruits to dine on. Ethan didn't answer his question. "From the god King Odin to the good King Odin," he spat the title out. After all, it was a title earned in blood. Ethan had read through the non-aggression pact that the Earth's sorcerer supreme of old had managed to secure with the Asgardian royal family, that is, Odin himself. However, the pact was not binding, it was just a sheet of paper with Odin's signature. The loose agreement was that Earth would willfully come under Asgardian protection as one of the 9 realms. In return, they would provide Asgardian forces to help during natural disasters and even with interdimensional threats, which was, of course, never honored. The only form of help they had received was Thor helping clean up after Loki, another Asgardian. "May I ask why a meeting between us is being held here?" Ethan asked. "Speak candidly, sorcerer." "I do not want to stand on tradition this close to the end," Odin said, as he made to sit on a nearby chair. "The end?" Ethan asked as he plucked a red grape and sat down. There was a pause, with Odin looking directly at Park and Ethan simply enjoying the view. Ragnarok, Odin finally spoke. It is coming. I can feel it. Now that word caught his attention. Since you told me to stop standing on tradition, what the hell are you going to do about it? Preparing a glorious end, maybe? Now that would be something I would pay money to watch. Ethan sensed the Odin force spike at his words. This wasn't an attack, just a reflex. A lesser being would have been panting on the ground just from being in his presence. Odin hadn't expected me to stop being traditional, Ethan thought. Clunk. The Maharaga wheel spun. Years prior, Ethan had adapted to the Odin Force blast and facets of the power itself, but the Force possessed a versatile range of applications, from simple energy manipulation to teleportation, matter transformation, mind manipulation, and even reality warping. As Maharaga analyzed the Odin Force, information flooded Ethan's brain. He realized the connection between the Force and Odin wasn't as vast as he had initially expected, despite the Force bearing his name. It was surprisingly diluted. Odin acted more like an anchor than a conduit. The vast majority of the power flowed through Asgard itself, with the rest branching toward hundreds of distant realms. What remained in Odin was a mere sliver of his original capacity. This discovery presented Ethan with a potential solution for his Shikigami deployment. He shared a link with all his summons, but over long distances, once a Shikigami exhausted its cursed energy, it dissipated back into his shadow. If Maharaga could provide a model to channel his cursed energy to his Shikigami remotely, similar to how Odin channeled the Odin Force, that would be a game-changer. Chapter 51, Talk with Odin, Part 2. Ethan was lost in thought when Odin spoke. Done eyeing my force yet? Ethan's eyes widened slightly. Odin was the first to ever notice his adaptation process. You know us sorcerers always a curious bunch, Ethan replied. Odin huffed. It was surprisingly thoughtful of him to tell me about Ragnarok, Ethan thought. Was the great Odin really asking for my help with the survival of Asgard? I appreciate your candidness. Earth would be better prepared for it, but why isn't Thor here? Why only approach me? Ethan asked. Before we speak further, a change in venue might be needed, Odin said, looking up as if expecting something. Are you expecting someone else? Ethan asked, confused. The Bifrost, Odin answered with a frown. Heimdall had just ruined his moment. Oh, that. Maharaga had adapted to Heimdall's omniscience years ago. Heimdall cannot see me or anything around me unless I let him. You must be within my radius. The better question is why I haven't been swarmed by thousands of Asgardians for taking their king offline. Midgardians, when did your kind learn all these tricks? Odin grunted in surprise. Ethan smiled and released the seal around him, allowing Heimdall to see them. Soon the Bifrost descended, engulfing them. Ethan's seals kept the energy at bay. He had adapted to forceful teleportation and the energy coursing through the Bifrost bridge. He queried where the Bifrost was taking them, then relented. Clunk. Maharaga had begun adapting to teleportation via the Bifrost. The destination was a random hillside. They were still on Asgard. He could make out the distant towers of the royal castle. Odin sat down near the edge of the cliff, looking out into the distance. Ethan could see every bit of age etched into his face. Frigga used to bring me here. Odin spoke after sitting down. I am sorry about your wife. I never met her, but from what Thor told me she seemed like a brave woman, Ethan added solemnly. Brave, I kind too, and no. I am the one who should apologize for how I acted, Odin spoke, referring to their previous encounter. A heavy pause followed, where only the rhythmic sound of the distant sea waves could be heard, until Odin spoke again. How long do you think I have? For years, Ethan answered without hesitation. Beyond his general understanding of the Odin Force, he knew that Thor, Ragnarok took place in late 2017, and they were currently nearing the end of 2013. 5, Odin countered. Ethan took that less as a disagreement and more as a personal challenge Odin was placing upon his own fading vitality. What do you want to talk about? Ethan asked, cutting to the chase. Hide this from my old friend. I think he might prefer not to have heard it, Odin requested, glancing toward the open sky. Ethan did as asked, weaving a veil of privacy. The All-Father waited for a nod of confirmation before revealing the true purpose of this meeting. Heimdall is the one who told me about you after the Destroyer's attack on Midgard. He claimed you wield cursed energy like the Midgardians of old. He watched your battle against the Destroyer, though now I suspect he wasn't seeing it through your eyes, but through someone else's, Odin spoke at length. It made sense. Ethan hadn't truly applied his concealment seals to others yet, as it had been a low priority. That was a variable that could change depending on how this conversation went. Odin continued his explanation. I don't have just 2 claimants to my throne. I have 3, he said, pausing to expect a look of shock from Ethan. He didn't get it. Only 3? Ethan remarked. The Odin force flared in response. It wasn't the kind of surprise the king had anticipated. Clunk. The Maharaga wheel in Ethan's shadow spun once more. Ethan reflected on the persona of Odin he had expected based on the records left by previous sorcerer supremes. A barbarian subjugator putting on the facade of a wise king, Agamotto had written. While the views of subsequent sorcerer supremes had softened, becoming almost favorable, the notion that Odin was prejudiced against anyone not of Asgardian blood remained a constant thread. There were no accounts of Odin meeting a sorcerer supreme in person since the 21st, but Kamartaj held vast archives regarding sorcerers who traveled off-world to study the mysteries of the outer universe. Odin's era of conquest had technically ended during Agamotto's lifetime, but by its conclusion, a staggering portion of the observable universe was under his command. His empire spanned entire galactic systems. He had conquered so many worlds that ancient texts dubbed him the ruler of all sentient life. Ethan had to admit his knowledge of the greater universe was limited to Kamartaj's archives, earth science, and his own meta-knowledge. Perhaps Odin's ancient wars were fueled by a need to purge the universe of a greater evil. Even if they weren't, he had maintained peace and fostered life across galaxies for millennia, ending the era of interplanetary wars. Ethan understood the cold logic of the necessary sacrifice for the greater good. Perhaps this good king deserved an olive branch, or perhaps Ethan was simply being biased, swayed by the meta-knowledge of the man Odin had become. However, the conquest itself wasn't what bothered him most. What Ethan couldn't stomach was that the star systems, conquered in blood, were left to fend for themselves once the conflict ended. Odin did nothing. Absolutely nothing. No, he did worse than nothing. He actively pulled all his frontline Asgardian troops back to the Golden City. All that blood, all those lives lost on both sides, just for him to abandon them. This process didn't happen immediately, it unfolded over centuries. Odin grew indifferent to the conquered worlds, his focus narrowing over time. The Asgardian Empire shrank, era by era, until only the 9 realms and the Golden City remained. Even most of the 9 realms eventually forgot they were ever part of an empire. Odin looked only after his own people, and what he left behind for the rest was chaos and anarchy. Chaos and anarchy on a universal scale. The momentary burst of anger from Odin regarding the perceived insult told Ethan everything he needed to know. The conqueror within the Allfather had never truly left, it had merely been diluted over time. The frown on Ethan's face deepened. Truly, kings were vain and prideful creatures. Must you provoke me, sorcerer? I am many things, but I am no Olympian, Odin added firmly, as if being an Olympian were somehow worse than being a genocidal dictator. With a wave of his hand, Odin transmuted a container, the very same vessel that Tora had used to house the ether. Thor believes you should keep this, he claims it will be safer in your hands, Odin added, looking directly at Ethan. Then he turned his gaze back to the waves crashing against the distant, sunlit horizon. I have also heard about the theft of the scepter containing the Mind Stone on Midgard. I have a theory. Would you like to hear it? Throw it at me, Ethan added casually. He partially summoned his Shikigami, the gravity sheep Ares, manifesting only its fluffy wool to create a makeshift beanbag. There was no other place to sit, as Odin occupied the only rock available. My son Loki. Before he was transported from Midgard after the Chitauri invasion, someone was impersonating him on the other side of the city, using his known power to change his appearance as a cover. Now this individual has managed to steal the Mind Stone scepter. Not only that, but in one stroke they managed to rid Midgard of a potential weapon of mass destruction, which in the wrong hands could be catastrophic. Odin spoke at length, and Ethan listened patiently. There was no need to rush. But I suspect this person was playing a much deeper game, Odin added, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. I know it was you. He fixed Ethan with a piercing gaze, clearly expecting a reaction. Shock, perhaps? or even a flash of righteous outrage. All he received in return was a hollow, blank stare. Your guardian currently holds the time stone. You yourself possess the mind stone, and you have been in the immediate vicinity of both the space and reality stones, Odin quipped, his tone shifting to one of weary gravitas. Do you realize how rare that is? Even in my exceptionally long lifetime, I have never encountered so many of the stones in such proximity. He paused, the levity vanishing. It is a grim premonition that a great war is coming, an infinity war. I cannot say when it will arrive, nor can I say exactly whom you will be fighting. But make no mistake, it is coming. Yes, I took Loki's scepter, Ethan spoke firmly, his voice cutting through the heavy air. But I did not do so because I wish to hoard that power for myself, as you do within the gilded walls of your vaults. I have specific plans for it. And once those plans are fulfilled, I intend to destroy it. To leave it intact would be nothing more than a temptation for future generations. Plans, he says. Odin echoed, his voice echoing with the cynicism of 1,000 years. Every one of us has plans, sorcerer. Fate simply favors you more than most. But make no mistake, being a target of fate is never a good thing, and it is rarely so powerless as to need help fulfilling its designs. What are you getting at? Ethan asked. I will give them to you, the reality and space stones, Odin said after a pause. But you must make a binding vow. I will not provide an indefinite servitude, Ethan added immediately. I am not asking for a servant. A savior, perhaps? Yes, a savior will do just fine, Odin mused, tasting the word on his tongue. As long as I draw breath, my first daughter, Hela, will remain sealed in hell. But upon my death, that seal breaks. With his meta-knowledge, Ethan knew Hela had been imprisoned by Odin for thousands of years. She was locked away following a failed coup and her unchecked warmongering, her containment sustained entirely by Odin's life force. What exactly are you asking of me? Ethan questioned. All-Father, Ethan couldn't help but quip. And what a father he was, banishing 2 of his children and imprisoning 2 others, with Hela falling into both categories. Will you make me speak of it? Odin spoke in a solemn voice. Of course. If you want a binding vow, the terms of the agreement should be very clear, Ethan replied. Convince her to leave behind her warmongering days if you can. Or neutralize her if you must, Odin commanded, looking directly into Ethan's eyes. In exchange, the Space Stone and the Reality Stone will be yours. I do not know what you intend to do with them, but you lifted Mjolnir without breaking my magic, so in a sense you are worthy. Ethan reflected on his contingencies regarding the infamous goddess of death. Based on his knowledge from the films, Hela was a formidable adversary, but she lacked the definitive, one-shot kill capability required to bypass Maharaga's adaptation. Furthermore, he understood that if she successfully enacted her plans to conquer Asgard, she wouldn't stop there. Hela's ambition will not be satiated from Asgard alone, she would inevitably descend upon Earth. Therefore, even if he hadn't entered into this binding vow, there was a high probability he would have been forced to fight her at some point in the future. The conflict was effectively a predetermined outcome. But now he was being compensated with 2 Infinity Stones for a confrontation he was going to pursue regardless. It was a strategic steal, he was being paid to secure his own future. Odin rose slowly from the stone he had been occupying. Ethan mirrored the movement, canceling Ares' summon and watching as the gravity-wielding Shikigami dissolved into his shadow. The 2 stood in a heavy, silent stalemate, studying one another until Odin finally extended his hand. Ethan reached out and shook it. As their palms met, the air rippled with the weight of a binding vow setting in. The pact was sealed. Chapter 52, Christmas Morning. 2 weeks later, December 25th, 2013. Ethan Park. Ethan had returned from Asgard nearly 2 weeks ago carrying the ether, a sign of trust, as Odin had phrased it. However, the Tesseract remained in the Asgardian vaults. Ethan was slated to receive it only after his inevitable confrontation with Hela. In truth, Ethan felt no urgent rush to assemble the full gauntlet of stones. He was acutely aware of the harrowing price required to claim the Soul Stone, and he was fundamentally unwilling to pay it. Instead, he had been contemplating an alternative. If he could successfully absorb Mahito, could the disaster curse serve as a viable surrogate for the Soul Stone's power? Ethan didn't strictly need the raw might of an Infinity Stone while his operations were confined to Earth. Yet, a lingering question remained: could 5 Infinity Stones amplify idol transfiguration to a global scale? He didn't have the answer, at least not yet. Today was Christmas. Ethan woke early, adhering to his rigid routine. Following a quick breakfast of eggs and sausages, he remained sequestered in the training yard of his Los Angeles residence. Kamartaj maintained numerous such safe houses across the globe, providing the necessary privacy for their craft. Ethan summoned his twin blades, Hattie and Skull. His shadow recoiled, and from the depths of his shadow emerged the 2 swords forged of destroyer metal. After 2 hours of intense swordplay, sweat trailed down his torso in salt-stained rivulets. His body was visibly strained, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He had begun his practice well before the sun crested the horizon. Normally, such exertion wouldn't leave him this fatigued. However, he wasn't merely practicing forms. Anchored within his shadow were 2 mountain-sized boulders, each easily weighing over 10 tons, adding a crushing weight to his every movement. Yet, despite the immense physical toll, his breathing remained remarkably steady. Ethan Park could feel his muscles contract in perfect sequence as he swung Hattie. The movement originated from a subtle twist of his back, radiating through his core until the full force of the momentum coursed through his arms. Hattie and Skull cut through the air with the lethal grace of a whip. As he exhaled, the tips of the blades shimmered with the stable cursed energy he was channeling into them. Utilizing the weight behind each strike, he flowed into the next form without a second's hesitation, his feet dancing across the dusty floor in a seamless transition. In his mind's eye, he was currently besieged by 24 curses. His objective was not merely to kill them, but to do so without allowing a single one to land a hit. He moved through the imaginary horde like a ballerina on a stage, breathe, parry, and twist to bypass a claw, a thrust forward to dispatch another feigned, a leap to the side to block an overhead slash. For a fleeting moment, the phantoms shifted. He wasn't fighting curses anymore, he was fighting her. Hela. He could almost hear the rhythmic clashing of their steel, her obsidian black against his pale white, under a phantom morning sun. They clashed on a distant hillside of endless green grass, where he could feel a cool morning breeze blowing in from a distant invisible sea. Then the vision snapped. He was back in the Los Angeles training yard, his forearms burning with exertion as he swiped both Hattie and Skull one last time. Weary and slick with sweat, he looked down the length of his arm, past the leather-wrapped white and black hilt and the stark cross-shaped guard, following the steel until the blade narrowed to a lethal point. He took a silent moment to admire the divine metallurgy of the destroyer metal before finally depositing the twin swords back into the depths of his shadow. Leaving the training yard behind, he made his way to the bathroom for a quick, restorative shower. In the living room, the television had been left on, and the morning news broadcast filled the quiet space of the house. Against the rhythmic backdrop of the running water, the lead anchor for a major Los Angeles network, KTLA, breaks the story. Breaking news, the dire paradox. Breaking news. Good morning, Los Angeles. We are breaking into your Christmas morning with developing and frankly chilling news out of the LAPD. Sources within the department are confirming that 2 women were abducted 3 nights ago in what investigators are describing as the signature work of a notorious serial killer. One of them was unfortunately just found dead in the woods in Griffith Park. But there is a massive, baffling catch. Police tell us the crime scenes contain the exact, unmistakable calling cards of Rosalind Dyer. As many of you remember, Dyer was the lakeside killer who terrorized this state years ago, known for the grisly ritual of tattooing the date of death onto her victims before taking their lives. However, as of this broadcast, Rosalind Dyer remains behind bars. She is currently facing the death penalty at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. State prison officials have reportedly conducted an emergency roll call and confirmed that Dyer is accounted for and has not left her cell. The LAPD is now facing a terrifying question. Are we looking at a sophisticated copycat, or has Dyer found a way to continue her reign of terror from behind the walls of a maximum security prison? We have a team headed to the 77th Street station for an official police briefing. We will bring you more as this story develops. For now, authorities are urging residents to remain vigilant. Ethan emerged from his shower, steam clinging to the air as he caught the tail end of a television broadcast. On the screen, the profile of Rosalind Dyer was being meticulously depicted in a police file graphic. Status: incarcerated, California State Prison, Chowchilla. Sentence: awaiting death penalty. Victim count, 7 confirmed murders. Signature MO, pre-mortem date of death tattoos. The screen flickered, the statistics vanishing as the broadcast cut back to the news anchor. Live broadcast, the return of the lakeside killer. A split screen appears. On the left, a grainy high-security mugshot of Rosalind Dyer. On the right, a map of Los Angeles with a flashing red icon over mid-Wilshire. For those just joining us, the LAPD is in a state of high alert following a series of abductions that bear the unmistakable, gruesome hallmarks of the lakeside killer, Rosalind Dyer. To understand the gravity of this threat, we have to look at the profile of a woman currently awaiting her death sentence at Chowchilla. A graphic titled Criminal Profile, Rosalind Dyer scrolls beside the anchor. Dyer is no ordinary killer. FBI profilers classify her as a high-functioning sadistic sociopath. Her crimes are defined by what experts call manual brutality. We are talking about the use of her bare hands to perform horrific acts, the extraction of teeth, the skinning of victims, and surgical-level dismemberment while the victims are conscious but paralyzed by drugged wine. Her signature? A day of death tattoo, inked onto the skin of her victims while they are still alive. As one LAPD profiler famously noted, she doesn't just kill the body, she kills the piece of everyone who finds it. Ethan had heard enough. Some humans were no better than curses. As he was just about to close the television, another news flashed. The anchor's expression turns from professional gravity to genuine shock as a producer speaks into her earpiece. Wait, we are receiving a direct feed. We're being told this is a video sent to our affiliate moments ago by the alleged kidnapper. We must warn viewers, this footage is disturbing. The screen cuts to a grainy, low-resolution video. The camera shakes. In the center, a woman, Miss Tropes, is bound to a chair, trembling. A distorted voice speaks from behind the lens. This is a message for Ethan Park. Visit the Mid-Wilshire police station within sunset and ask for Rosalind Dyer. If you don't, Miss Tropes here will be found in a ditch somewhere on the outskirts of town. This is not a joke. Visit Mid-Wilshire or else. Oh. It seemed even the season news reporter was baffled. There you have it, Los Angeles. A direct ultimatum to one of the Avengers. Mr. Park, if you are watching this, the LAPD and the life of this innocent woman are waiting for you at the Mid-Wilshire. Click. The screen went black. Ethan let out a long, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the last 3 years. He didn't need to say a word. Tora, sensing his intent, moved with grace. With a shimmer of transmutation spell, he transmuted his a white long-sleeve, high-collar shirt paired with dark, loose-fitting trousers, resembling a more casual, modern, slightly training-oriented look. Ethan didn't linger. He headed straight for the main door of the house. Rosalind Dyer. It was the winter of 2009 when the heavy steel doors slammed shut, sealing Rosalind Dyer away from a rapidly changing reality. Back then, the world was already strange. Whispers of green rage monsters and billionaires in armored suits dominated the news. But soon, the world turned horrific. An alien invasion, a gaping portal over New York, it was a nightmare made real. She had missed every second of it, rotting in a windowless cell, all because she had let Nick Armstrong catch her. The deterioration began 3 months ago with persistent bloating and a dull, nagging abdominal ache. Initially, Rosalind blamed the abysmal prison rations, the flavorless slop the guards shoveled onto her tray. But when her appetite vanished, a cold fear took root. As the daughter of 2 drug addicts, Rosalind had spent her childhood in a constant state of hunger. To be hungry was her default state. To have no desire for food was a sign that something was wrong. Her collapse was inevitable. She fainted in the common area. Though the guards initially scoffed, the weary prison doctor took one look at her swollen abdomen and demanded an immediate transfer to an outside facility. The hospital was filled with advanced, almost imaginary technology, machines that peered through her skin as if it were glass. After days of grueling tests, the verdict finally arrived: she had cancer. Ovarian cancer. How ironic. She recalled the time she had excised the uterus of a young woman while the victim watched, paralyzed by the wine Rosalind had provided. The girl's pleas for mercy had been amusing, and the memory of the victim holding her own uterus in her mangled hands, offering it up like a morbid prayer while begging for her life, still made her shudder with pleasure. Her prison sentence was suddenly rendered meaningless by a much more inevitable ticking clock. She had already formed plans to initiate her escape, but those designs had been years in the slow, meticulous making. That was when she remembered hearing whispers of him, Ethan Park, a man capable of curing any disease. Even in prison, news eventually found its way inside. She had, of course, dismissed the rumors initially. But following her diagnosis, she began to investigate this mystery Avenger, as the world called him. What she discovered through her outside sources was as interesting as it was disturbing. It seemed the stories were not false, if anything, they had been understated. And so she enacted her plans, ensuring that Ethan Park would personally come to cure her. Men and women alike, they were all so predictable. Especially men like Park, whom the world put on a pedestal, they always caved under pressure when an innocent life was on the line. The next day, she summoned Assistant District Attorney Sean Del Monte, offering to lead them to the other bodies she had buried across the 4,000 acres of Griffith Park. She stipulated that she must be present, claiming she could only locate the remains if she were there herself. It was a lie, of course, but she could not miss the chance to witness their horrified expressions when they realized the remains were far too fresh. That was yesterday. Now she sat in a building swarming with police officers, most of whom would gladly see her dead, simply waiting for Ethan Park to arrive and save her life. Chapter 53, Recollection and Contempt. John Nolan. It had been the most grueling day of his rookie career. 6 months into the job, John Nolan thought he was finally beyond the reach of surprise, but he had been dead wrong on that front. Not only had they been forced to trek up and down the rugged hills where Rosalind Dyer had buried her victims, but they had also discovered a fresh body. It was no older than a few days, yet it bore the exact same DOD date of death signature that Rosalind was infamous for. Before joining the LAPD, John Nolan was a 45-year-old construction company owner from Queens, New York. After separating from his wife, Sarah, and seeing their son, Henry, off to college, he found his calling during the Battle of New York. Successfully taking down a stray Chitauri soldier during the invasion had become his fuel, a reminder of the necessity of doing the right thing. Boy Scout. That was the moniker Rosalind Dyer had bestowed upon him. She had refused to cooperate with Detective Armstrong, demanding instead to speak with Nolan and him alone. John didn't fully grasp her obsession. Perhaps it was because he had been the most talkative of her escorts, a classic rookie mistake. No veteran cop ever wanted a serial killer's undivided attention focused on them. He stepped inside the holding cell, which had been cleared out the previous day. The other prisoners had been transported to different stations to ensure total isolation in preparation for her arrival. John steeled his nerves, sat on the bench across from her, and began, "You asked to see me. Why? I like you, John. Nick's boring. And what I am doing has no place for a mediocre man like him," Rosalind replied, her narcissism reflecting in every word she spoke. "We saw the broadcast you had your sycophant send to every news channel in Los Angeles. You got what you wanted, Rosalind. You got your rise to fame. Now tell us, who killed that woman and how can we find the one he kidnapped?" Nolan spoke at length. Rosalind ignored him and asked with a smile, "You know the best part about getting caught, Officer Nolan?" Nolan shook his head in confusion. Getting to relive every detail with Nick. Rosalind turned to the tripod camera in the room. He wondered how she knew that at that moment, every other officer in the station was watching this feed in real time. "I didn't expect that," Rosalind sighed. Seeing Nick, walking the trail with him to visit the graves, it was glorious. "I enjoyed sharing my experience, seeing how horrified people were. Cops are jaded, you know? You really have to work to get a reaction from them because of the wall they put up. I remember at the trial, the jury, those horrified faces, the families. I ate their pain like a 5-star meal. Lopez was right, this woman only wanted attention and they were wasting time here." He stood up and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Rosalind asked. "I wasn't done speaking. I am done listening. Clearly you are waiting for Mr. Park to arrive, but I wouldn't be too optimistic. He hasn't been spotted in one place twice in over a year, he moves around the world. For all we know, he could be in the middle of the Amazon rainforest with no cell signal," he replied. "Wait." John was about to leave when she spoke. It looked like she was finally coming down from the high. "Tell me about the body we discovered," she asked. "I only saw a glimpse of her face before you took me to the van. How did she die?" He turned to face her. Visual autopsy showed she suffocated. Most likely in some kind of container. Her face showed signs of intradermal hemorrhage. "Ah, stupid girl," Rosalind remarked. Wasting all that air screaming. She probably shortened her life by an hour. What about her hands? Was she trying to free herself? Rosalind asked with a grin. Yes. Nolan was starting to understand why the senior TOs kept their distance from this woman. I imagine her last few hours were truly awful. Now that I have shared something with you, it would only be polite if you shared something with me. Who killed that woman? Slow down, Officer Nolan. We are still in the foreplay stage, Rosalind replied. How did the killer find the burial site? Nolan asked, suppressing a shiver. She leaned closer and whispered, because I told them. You were able to communicate? How? It shouldn't have been possible. Rosalind Dyer's communications were heavily monitored. She ignored his question and asked one of her own. What about you? What would you do if you were trapped like that stupid girl? Consume the air as fast as possible and get it over with, or hold on, trusting someone to save you. I will hold on for as long as I can. I will give my friends a chance, the best possible chance at finding me, Nolan replied with conviction. Maybe that's the difference, Rosalind concluded. Between what? Nolan asked. You and me. I have always known no one is coming to save me. That is how I chose to live on. Rosalind replied, then asked, What do you think of this world, John? This world where monsters wearing human skin walk among us? An alien who can control lightning, a green rage monster who can raise a city in a fit of rage, a World War II veteran, probably a war criminal too, a billionaire in iron suits, and then there is the man who can heal any illness. Monsters and gods walk among us once again. Don't you feel tiny compared to all of them? Nolan genuinely thought for a moment, his mind recalling the Battle of New York when he had carried an injured woman, bleeding profusely from her abdomen, near the New York Public Library. Another squad of Chitauri soldiers had descended upon them. Nolan had thought it was all over and went to cover the bleeding woman with his own body, but the next moment, hundreds of rabbits had emerged from the ground and swept the area, clearing out the Chitauri soldiers. Hell, these same rabbits had used some form of disc to save the dying woman. Later, he had found that these rabbits followed orders from Ethan Park. He hadn't had the chance to meet Park face to face. The man had left to volunteer for search and rescue, but from the tales he had heard, the man was no monster. I don't feel tiny, Rosalind, I feel inspired. Among those gods and monsters, there are still people choosing to do what's right. If they can, why can't I? Nolan replied. You are unbearably naive, Rosalind sneered, her nose scrunching in disgust. Maybe, Nolan answered calmly, but that is how I choose to live on. Angela Lopez. Officer Lopez had been on edge all morning. She was in charge of the detail responsible for transporting Dyer, or at least she was yesterday. Only now did she finally have a moment to relax and switch uniforms inside the locker room. They had been ambushed the previous day during the trek through Griffith Park, and it was her bullet that had neutralized the attacker. Detective Armstrong had seemed eager to speak with her after learning the shooter was the husband of one of Rosalind's victims, but the man had ultimately held back. After changing, she returned to the bullpen. It was still early morning, she hadn't gone home last night. There, she saw her rookie approaching from the side. Officer Talia Bishop had recently resigned from the LAPD after being issued a blue card, and Lopez had taken over her training until a suitable replacement could be found. Officer Lopez, sorry about yesterday, he said, clearly referring to his over-talkative nature during the transport. She observed Nolan for a moment. She had let the matter go, but the older man was often far too friendly with criminals. She decided it was time to remind her rookie exactly what was at stake. It's over, Boot. Like she said, it doesn't matter if she knows our names, but you need to reconsider how you interact with that monster. You saw how she reacted, how proud she was of that body we found, she explained. Nolan had the right heart, he just needed the right mindset to become a great cop. I know. For a brief moment, I forgot how dangerous she was. I spoke to her earlier, she seemed so normal, except for the fact that the topic was murder. There's no remorse in her at all, Nolan concluded. That's how psychopaths are. Lopez had experienced her fair share of them, especially the Purple Man while visiting her aunt during her academy days. They aren't like the movies, exaggerated and acting like the source of all evil. They are friendly, warm, and even charming as they draw you in. Her mind flashed to the things Kilgrave had made her do, things she had done willingly. The disgust must have shown on her face, as her rookie visibly recoiled. She shook her head to clear the memory and asked, "Any updates on the park front?" "No, the news about Mid-Wilshire has been running all morning. We've got a crowd outside the station waiting to see if Mr. Park arrives. Captain Anderson and Sergeant Grey have been in her office all morning, taking calls from the higher-ups." She raised an eyebrow at that. A rookie shouldn't have access to that kind of information. Seeing her reaction, Nolan quickly added, "Smitty might have eavesdropped on them while hitting the vending machine on the second floor, which is every 5 minutes. That made sense. She simply shook her head and stifled a laugh, though a movement from the side caught her attention. The captain and Wade were making their way toward briefing room. "Let's go. It seems they have something." She followed her rookie into the expansive briefing room, characterized by its sleek glass walls on 3 sides. Taking a seat beside her colleague Bradford, she observed as the captain and sergeant began adjusting the settings on the large monitor. Before long, the room was packed to capacity, with those who didn't secure seats forced to stand along the perimeter. "Listen up," she began, her voice level but carrying to the back of the room. "I just got off the phone with the chief. This comes directly from the brass. They want Ethan Park to have absolutely no contact with Rosalind." Immediately, the room erupted into a low, concerned murmur. She and Bradford shared a knowing look. This was clearly a case of heavy-handed politicking. Ethan had brazenly refused summons time and time again from the High Court, the Supreme Court, and even Congress. Within just a single year, 15 summons had been issued for him to be present in front of a committee, and not one had been answered. The primary focus of this relentless inquiry was his uncanny ability to heal any and all illnesses. In fact, Justice Kayla Wallace, presiding over the Supreme Court, had openly criticized Ethan, claiming he was hoarding a method that could revolutionize modern medicine and save countless lives. But this scrutiny didn't stop at the courtroom. Initially, following the Battle of New York, nearly everyone around the globe was grateful to the Avengers. They had halted the Chitauri invasion after all. However, voices like Justice Wallace's soon began calling for accountability from each member. Every single Avenger had a dark past they couldn't escape, except for Ethan Park, of course. All that existed of his record was his graduation from Midtown Elementary in New York and Palisades High School in Los Angeles. Beyond that, there was nothing. He was a ghost, and so he has been target for what he did do. What do we do if he actually shows up? Nolan was the first to break the quiet murmur of the room, directing his question toward Grey. Grey looked uncomfortable for a moment, glancing toward the captain before turning back to Nolan. "Well, technically, there are several bench warrants issued in Mr. Park's name, not to mention the contempt of Congress. Indeed, in the eyes of the law, Ethan was a criminal. Refusing a subpoena from Congress can lead to a contempt of Congress's citation, a misdemeanor punishable by 1 to 12 months of imprisonment and significant fines. Congress has enforced this via criminal prosecution by the DOJ, civil lawsuits, and even their own inherent contempt power to detain individuals like Park," Captain Anderson finished, noticing Grey's hesitation. "This has forced our hand. We are to arrest Ethan Park if he steps foot in Mid-Wilshire." Just then, a sudden breeze flowed through the room. It was jarring. There shouldn't have been a draft in an air-packed, sealed briefing room. Tim Bradford was the first to react. "Above US," he shouted. Standing there upside down on the ceiling of the briefing room, as if gravity didn't apply to him, was Ethan Park. Lopez and every other officer stood up abruptly, scrambling to create distance with their hands hovering over their holsters. From his perch, Ethan looked directly down at Captain Anderson and Sergeant Grey. "And how exactly do you plan on accomplishing that?" Chapter 54, DOD 251213. Ethan wouldn't have intervened in this investigation if Dyer's accomplice hadn't invoked his name. His simple policy, to stay out of the business of others, was more for his own sake than anyone else's. He knew that once he started policing every crook, it would be impossible to know where to draw the line. At the state level? A national level? Or perhaps the entirety of the globe? People rarely change. There will always be another crime to solve and another murderer to prosecute. It is an endless cycle. On some level, Ethan was unwilling to shoulder that kind of responsibility for the sake of his own peace of mind. He already hunted curses on a daily basis, which was a heavy enough burden. Of course, if he encountered a thug during his cursed hunting, he would stop them, no questions asked. In every new city he visited, he sent his numerous chimera samsara to the local hospitals to heal the sick, again, no questions asked. He had received offers of hundreds of millions of dollars to provide his services. One particular group had even offered him billions just to reveal the secret behind his abilities. Because he didn't maintain a forwarding email or any social media presence, most of these contracts remained open-ended. He ignored the vast majority of them, but there were exceptions, specifically cases involving children and infants. Ethan was a man of simple means, even in his past life. He needed 3 meals a day and a bed to sleep on at night. Between the Stark stocks he had acquired during the dip of 2008 and his original income from Camartage, he lived comfortably. After completing his morning routine and a quick shower, he headed toward Mid-Wilshire. He had to stifle a laugh at the sheer absurdity of the situation. Rosalind Dyer had kidnapped a woman and apparently believed that would be enough to force him into doing her bidding. He arrived at the precinct and sank into the shadows, moving unseen toward the main briefing room where the officers were gathered. He caught the tail end of their meeting, specifically the part where they discussed placing him under arrest. "Tora?" Ethan called out through their mental link. "I will need to be in the immediate vicinity of that woman for at least a minute to extract specific memories," Tora replied smoothly. "You will have them," Ethan assured him, slipping out of the shadows and onto the ceiling. Ethan remained there for a full 5 seconds before someone finally looked up. Finally, he thought. "And how exactly do you plan on accomplishing that?" he asked, using his normal voice. "Are you deepening your voice, Ethan?" Tora questioned as he too began to slip out from his shadow. "Deepening my voice? This is my original voice." "Stop wasting time and go find her," Ethan replied, sounding a little more defensive than he intended. Ethan pushed off the ceiling, executing a seamless 180-degree mid-air rotation before landing gracefully on his feet. However, before Ethan could transition into his next move, Bradford lunged from his blind spot with arms wide in a standard tackle position, driving into him with every ounce of his strength. "A wall?" Bradford questioned, staring at Ethan with genuine bewilderment as he retreated to create distance after the failed tackle. He immediately leveled his weapon and fired his taser directly at Ethan's chest. Ethan blocked the incoming projectile with a wave of his arm and glanced down at his right arm where the taser leads had made solid contact, then pointed a casual finger back at the officer. "Do I know you? I am notoriously terrible at remembering a guy's face, but I have a distinct feeling I have seen you somewhere before." Bradford looked confounded. There should be approximately 2,000 volts of electricity coursing through Park's nervous system. Why wasn't he convulsing on the floor? He was about to respond when Captain Anderson's authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Park, I strongly advise you to come in willingly. This situation will go much smoother for everyone involved if you cooperate." "Your guy attacked me first," Ethan exclaimed, gesturing toward Bradford. From the side, Nolan stepped forward. "Well, you did appear in the middle of a police briefing room without warning." Officer Bradford was following standard protocol. Actually, no, there is no protocol for this specific scenario. Nolan seemed momentarily confused by his own logic. "Fair point," Ethan replied, shifting his gaze to the speaker. I remember you. Small world, no? You're the guy who saved those women during the Chitauri invasion." Ethan spoke with one hand thoughtfully on his chin. "You remember me?" Nolan asked, a visible smile breaking across his face. Yes. I never forget the brave ones." And indeed he was. Ethan's rapid escape Shikigami had reported that this man, after securing those women in a library, had immediately ventured back out into the chaos to rescue more people. "You're a cop, huh? I guess that makes sense." Nolan was about to clarify that he hadn't been an officer back then, but Ethan had already turned his attention back to the group. John looked at Lopez, who was maintaining a hard stare, though something in her eyes had shifted. A hint of respect, perhaps? "Come on, guys, we're supposed to be on the same team here," Ethan remarked, glancing at the wall of officers surrounding him. "We all want to save the kidnapped women. Just tell your superiors that I forced your hand. I'll play the villain, I can certainly work with that." Ethan added the last part as he caught a single bead of sweat rolling down the sergeant's forehead. And if I refuse to play along?" Captain Anderson challenged. "Oh, then I will simply have to force you," Ethan replied, offering her an unsettlingly innocent smile. The moment those words left his mouth, every officer unhooked their holsters and trained their service weapons on him. Okay, that is quite enough out of you. I don't care if the world thinks you're some hero, nobody threatens the captain while standing in this precinct. Officer Lopez was the one who spoke, her sidearm pressed firmly against Ethan's temple. I have the location of the girl. It's done, Ethan, Tora shared through their mental link. Chingona? Aye, Ethan chirped, glancing at Officer Lopez. You know what they say, never mess with an angry Latina. He would know he had spent a considerable amount of time exorcising curses in New Mexico during an outbreak early this year. Though as the last word left his mouth, he activated Eclipse, vanishing instantly through shadow manipulation. The room fell into a stunned silence. Did you just make the guy who tanked my 2000-volt taser retreat by using your heritage? Bradford questioned, clearly bewildered. And what is up with his abilities? I thought it was just animals and healing. This question was directed at the captain, who looked just as perplexed. Across the distant skyline, Ethan flickered into existence, with Tora manifesting from his shadow. The reason he had made such a scene at Mid-Wilshire was simple. There was a small chance that even Rosalind Dyer didn't know the exact location of the victims. In that case, he would have had to comply with her demands. But it seemed her obsessive need to control every detail had been her downfall in this scenario. What is it, Tora? Ethan asked, sensing her lingering unease. She could sense me, Ethan. She looked directly at me while I was performing the spell, Tora explained. There was silence for a moment. It's not that unusual. There are always those who can perceive cursed energy slightly better than most, Ethan mused after some thought. I never thought a human could be more creepy than a curse, Tora added. You underestimate my kind, Tora, Ethan replied. Tora swung his arm in a circular motion, manifesting a shimmering sling ring portal. Anyway, let's go save that woman, Tora said as she sank back into his shadow. Rosalind's accomplice is a man named Caleb Wright. He has assumed the identity of one Ryan Coleman, who happens to own this zoo, Tora explained as they stepped through the front gate of the abandoned facility. As they made their way inside, Ethan spotted a worn-down cabin roughly 100 feet inside the dilapidated complex. The path here is well-trodden and the doorknob is polished from use, Ethan noted, kneeling to inspect the dirt trail that veered off the main concrete path. That means it's been accessed frequently, Tora added. There is definitely a Ted Kaczynski vibe around this cabin, Ethan replied grimly. Then they heard it, shallow, ragged breathing, and the metallic scent of blood hit their nostrils. I'll take the back, you take the front. We breach in 5 seconds, Ethan signaled to Tora. He and Tora moved into position. He mentally counted down while checking the handle. The door was locked. When he reached 5, he used shadow manipulation to phase through the rear entrance, while Tora did the same from the front. They were moving with such caution because they had sensed 2 distinct presences inside. Caleb Wright was there, in the immediate vicinity of the woman, likely in the middle of tattooing her. Ethan navigated the interior. The cabin was cluttered with old zoo equipment cages and rusted incubators stacked high to the ceiling. He moved toward the next room, noticing that Caleb hadn't even registered the breach, far too immersed in marking his next victim. He was never going to let this woman go, was he? Ethan thought. Even if he had helped Rosalind, this woman would likely be dead. Rage simmered within him as he entered the final room. Plastic sheets were draped everywhere, heavily stained with blood. He spotted Tora arriving from the opposite hallway, and there they saw her, Nora Tropes, tied to a rusty metal bed frame with her tormentor hovering over her. Caleb was wearing old-school headphones and remained oblivious even as Ethan stood just 4 feet away. Ethan cleared his throat. Caleb spun around frantically. Realizing the gravity of his situation, he darted a glance toward a revolver sitting on a nearby desk. Ethan tracked the movement. Go on. Maybe you'll make it. Caleb lunged for the weapon. Swish! At the last possible microsecond, Ethan activated Boogie Woogie, swapping the positions of Wright and Miss Tropes. Suddenly, Caleb lay bound to the steel bed frame, while Nora Tropes stood where he had been. As she began to collapse from shock, Tora swept in, catching her in a princess carry. Tora looked at the bound Caleb, then down at Ethan. I would like to handle this one, boss, he said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Those memories really got to you, didn't they? Memory extraction was always tricky. Tora might have witnessed what Rosalind did to her victim and what she and Caleb had planned for this Nora too. Ethan made his way outside the cabin, the unconscious Miss Tropes floating gently behind him. Tora rarely asked of him, he would not deny his request. Later that day, an anonymous 911 call was placed, providing the exact location of the zoo. What the authorities discovered was as gruesome as it was poetic. They found Caleb Wright's body with the tattoo DOD 251213 freshly inked on his skin. He was impaled by a single pole through his abdomen, though a medical examiner later confirmed the stake had meticulously missed every vital organ. Caleb had died a long, agonizing death. Nora Tropes was found earlier that afternoon in the St. Stephen's Hospital ER ward. Her memory of the event remained hazy, but she repeatedly recalled one vivid detail: a tiger had come to her rescue.